When I was little, I lived in an apartment complex that consisted of 2 buildings with a slight gap in between them. It was only about 50 feet, so I'd often walk there by myself to visit my mom's best friend in the other building. The apartments were surrounded by thick woods that had blackberry brambles, so thick that you couldn't stick your hand in without getting torn up by the thorns. This is relevant later. One afternoon, I went to my mother's best friend's apartment to deliver Girl Scout cookies, and stayed later than I meant to because I was fascinated by her aquariums. It started to get dark by the time I was leaving, but I wasn't scared because the buildings were so close. I had taken about 10 steps when my inner voice started screaming. I'm older now, so I recognize what it was, but at the time, it was like I was being overwhelmed with an intense desire to poop. I looked into the woods across the parking lot and saw an intense red glow from someone taking a drag from a cigarette. I turned back towards the apartment, trying to pretend that I hadn't seen anything. But then I heard the sound of something large moving in the woods. I turned my head for just a moment and there's this large, scary looking man starting to run at me. I took off, screaming bloody murder, knowing that I was less than 50 feet away from the safety of my apartment. I could hear his feet slapping the pavement behind me, and he was gaining on me. I was nearly on my porch steps when my uncle, who lived next door, opened his door to see why I was screaming bloody murder. I collapsed into his arms screaming about the man chasing me from the woods, but by the time my uncle opened his door, the man was gone. At first, they didn't believe me because there had been nobody there, but I was so hysterical they decided to check it out. They noticed an area had been disturbed in the blackberry brambles. They were so thick that my uncle had to use a machete to cut through them. About 2 feet into the area of disturbance, there was a small clearing with a pile of cigarette butts where the man had been standing, watching, and waiting for me. The man chasing me had disappeared, so they think he ran between the buildings when I started to get close to the apartment door. So about a week after this incident, my mother's boyfriend Russ and I were riding dirt bikes through the woods by our apartment. There was a retainer pond that we liked to fish at, so we headed out there that day to see if we could catch anything. We discovered a campsite on the trail that hadn't been there a few weeks prior, and Russ decided to check it out. It was just a tent, cooler, a fire pit, and trash strewn everywhere. The trash part really bugged Russ because we believe in the leave it better than you found it principle, and I could tell he was pissed. As we approached the tent, he announced himself to see if anyone was in there, and when they didn't respond, he pulled back the zipper from the tent. After looking inside for a moment, he ordered me to back up, but the damage had already been done since I got a clear look at what was inside the tent. Attached to the walls and littering the floor was some of the most brutal and sadistic adult magazine content anyone could imagine, and the worst part of it was the graffiti that had been added after the fact. Most of the models had their eyes scratched out, lines across their throat like it's been cut, and their blood drawn and dripping out of their orifices. It's been over 30 years since this happened, and the image is still splashed bright upon my memory. There was a torn sleeping pad surrounded by used condoms, and the pad looked like it had substantial stains that could have been blood. Russ stood there in silence for a minute, then told me to get on my bike because we were going home. When we got home, he called the sheriff, then led them out to the torture tent in the woods. They destroyed the campsite, and it was never spoken of again. I never put 2 and 2 together as a child, but as I get older, when I thought about it, I realized how unbelievably lucky I am. I worked overnights at a 24-hour diner. You could probably guess what company. I'm used to weird people and odd things happening, but tonight was too much. Their restaurant backs up to a field that has a tree line, and my cook and I went outside to smoke. We could hear someone yelling in the distance, but we get a lot of homeless people that come through this town that usually are harmless, so we just shrugged it off as weird and went back inside. Later, I came out again to smoke and throw some trash in the dumpster that's next to the field. I was stupid to go over there, but I hadn't heard him again. As I'm walking to the dumpster, I hear, "Hey, come here." It was much closer than when we heard the man yelling the first time. I went inside and got my coworker, who owns a car with a spotlight on it. We shined it into the field, which again, not smart, and we admit that, but we really couldn't see where he was. But he kept saying, "Hey girl, come here." I called the cops at this point because it was just too fucking weird. As I get off the phone with them, he comes walking out of the field. He's an older man wearing a tan trench coat, and my coworker and a customer run back inside because this dude is hauling ass across the parking lot. He started to come towards the door, and I called the cops again. My cook cut him off and told him he needed to go. The man was acting erratically, yelling at the cook and said, "I'll end your life the next time I see you, fucker." He kept moving his jacket by his waist like he was fishing for a weapon, but I couldn't see anything from inside. The cops come and get him down on the road, and an officer came basically saying that the guy is homeless and not mentally stable. No shit. We told him everything that happened, and my cook pressed charges on him. The officer told us that there wasn't anything they could do, and he wouldn't give her his name, so they let him go. Basically ended with, "Oh, by the way, he's known to carry a knife in his waistband. Call us if you need us. Bye." He came back, again hauling ass across the neighboring parking lot and back into the field. We could hear him screaming, "Hey, come here," again and again. We got busy when the bars closed and haven't heard him yelling since, but I know he's still back there because I caught him sleeping behind the dumpster before. My manager comes in the morning and I'm going to try to get her to let me take pictures of him off the security tapes so I can warn the other third shift workers. The field that he's camping out also backs up to a middle school, but the cops said, again, there's nothing they could do. Hopefully he moves on and leaves us alone, or the cops can catch him on something where no one gets hurt. Leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but I completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal, right? That's why we have insurance, right? I went to my neighbor and told him what happened, and gave them my insurance, phone number, and name. All I got was his first name. From the get-go, this dude was creepy. He was hitting on me, trying to date me, specifically trying to feed me. I'm attending out-of-state college and my parents are divorced. I left. On my drive to my mom's, the guy I backed into, Robert, began to text and call me. He was insistent that it was better for both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to companies that would fix it for about $500 and demanding I go on a date with him so I could give him the cash for the repair and he could feed me. I don't know what his deal with food was. I declined everything and started to get annoyed by his constant calls and texts. Finally, after 2 days of it, with my response only, "Please contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me. I blocked him. He made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay? This wasn't a hit and run. I blocked the second number. Then he used a new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or video of the accident to his insurance. I admit, this made me angry. I called his number and dug my nails so hard into my thigh I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date, and trying to entice me just to pay cash. I finally screamed, "Don't contact me again, you fucking inbred piece of shit." My dad heard me and was upset that I said that to someone I was in an accident with. I told him I said that to a guy who thought I was cute and just wanted a date. I blocked the third number. Next day, he reaches out again to tell me that I gave him the wrong policy number. I told him I didn't. He then said it would be easier to pay in cash, that I was the problem, etc. He was talking to his insurance, I guess, and began trying to validate my info. He had my mom's name, address, and phone number. I verified it, told him not to contact me again, and blocked his new number. Next morning, super early, I get a text, basically saying he finished the claim, and that I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through the insurance, and not going on a date with him. He included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risks. Stay on a good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got scared. Fifth number blocked. Then at midnight he texts, "You up? I know where you live. Don't try to screw me over on insurance. I'll report it as a hit and run. You should have gone on a date with me." I took my phone to my dad, showed him the text, and filled him in. My dad, a pretty scary dude, then called the guy. He answers, "Shoot, I knew you were into me. Want to come over?" My dad got very mad, said this is beyond harassment. This is the final warning not to contact me, that we didn't care if he reported it, etc. Robert began saying I came on to him, offered sex as payment, invited him to my house, and was a horny bitch. Instantly blocked, police contacted, insurance notified, all the things. The next day I talked to the insurance company, filed a protective order, got another text telling me I shouldn't involve the police, blocked the 7th number, notified the police, and I'm staying at my dad's because this dude doesn't have his address. My dad is a very, very scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. Late last night, watching Star Wars with my dad and older brother, the doorbell rings. My dad goes to see who it is, and it's fucking Robert with a trash bag filled with things that I supposedly left at his house. I call the police. My dad goes ballistic. Police come, arrest the guy. The bag? Lingerie, a knife, lip balm, and Adita Van Test fetish book. Just met with an attorney. Plot twist. Guy doesn't even own the house. He's a legal immigrant, is married, and is being deported. I feel awful that he's being deported. I generally think he wanted to rape or kill me. I go back to school in a few days, and I'm so terrified he or someone else will follow me. He was arrested for stalking, trespassing, felony assault. He tried to push my dad and spit on him. Insurance fraud. He lied about the accident to his insurance agent. Possession with a deadly weapon with a tent, the knife that was in the bag. Attempted breaking and entering. They just keep on adding charges. This is a story of someone I knew and had to cut ties with because he was a fucking psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes it a Let's Not Meet story. It started 4 years ago when I was living at a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too. And by all accounts, he was a pretty cool guy at first, very sociable, and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks, or talked about life having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, he started to get comfortable, and cracks started to show in this veneer. He would rant about government conspiracies. He was big into the Sigma male bullshit, and martial arts, and Christ, did he have a temper. He had this big dog he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips towards her began, and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those chic, little restoration jobs. This was a rented container in a storage yard among the outskirts of the town that we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there consistently until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend, to the point where their family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having pretended to be on his side, until they could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now, and they're happy. We all blocked his psycho ex on everything possible, but he continued to harass them, until eventually he disappeared, or so we thought. Fast forward to last year. I started to receive messages over social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was. Some friendly and some hostile. One of the profiles, however, was pretending to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going. Eventually, I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to this friend coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address, and she panicked. The address in question was a property that belonged to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming a suspected break-in. They found 5 people there, including my ex. Parked out front was a butcher's van, equipped with food storage and a collection of knives, hammers, and rope. I'm glad I didn't go. I was about 12. Me and my mom had gone to town 45 minutes out to do some shopping with her friends. I had a corn snake at the time, so I asked her if I could walk around the pet store one door down from the mini supermarket that she was shopping in to compare the prices of frozen mice with her local seller. She said sure, just come back as soon as I was done. The pet store had been there as long as I can remember. It had a very warehouse feel about it and was poorly lit by dim fluorescent lights too far above the floor. Before checking out the mice, I wanted to check the rest of the store, being the curious 12-year-old I was. As I was roaming around the aisles, I noticed you. You were in every single aisle I strolled down. Bald, middle-aged, a bit tubby, wearing dark blue plumber overalls over a white shirt. It was summer, and it was hot. I remember wondering why on earth you would come into a non-air-conditioned store in that. You carried a basket, but there was nothing in it. As you slowly stalked me down the aisle, I noticed the basket wasn't getting any more full. I started walking faster, taking random turns down different aisles to see if I was just being paranoid, but you were always 10 to 15 feet behind me. At some point, I finally thought I lost you. I power walked out of the pet store, and as soon as I cleared the doors, I sprinted down the street to the mini supermarket my mom was in. She hadn't even made it down the second aisle completely. I caught up to her. I immediately stripped off my bright pink hoodie and slung it in the cart, as well as ripping the hair tie out of my hair. I was smart for doing that, because when I looked back at the door, you were standing there, still carrying the basket from the pet store, and scanning the store for any sight of a 12-year-old girl in the bright pink hoodie and ponytail. When we left, I saw you in your van as you drove away, a plain white van, like something out of a true crime documentary or horror film. I think about you sometimes, and how if you caught me before I made it to the supermarket on that quiet Wednesday afternoon, what horrors could have been waiting for me in the back of the van. Guy in overalls who followed me out of the pet store without even putting down his basket. Even after 10 years, let's not ever meet again. Trigger warning for this story. Well, I recently found this subreddit and decided I would share a story with you all. This happened back in 2019 through 2021, and it still sticks with me today. I'll be using fake names for myself and the man that I'm talking about. Mary for me, and Dennis for him. When I was 13, I met someone on Discord. He was funny, smart, and exactly my type. He was 16, and we became close friends. After 3 months of getting to know him, I told him I had feelings for him. We ended up dating. We lived across the country from each other, and we're basically just friends, but whatever. So, as we are dating, he starts basically grooming me. As a kid who was always on the internet and exposed to kick also, I was used to this behavior and thought it was fine. He had me send nude photos, gross messages, and pretty much worship him. I wasn't allowed to talk to other people on Discord without him there and stuff like that. He told me that he would kill himself if I ever left, or how he was always on drugs because he was so sad. He was also incredibly racist and thought Nazi jokes were okay. I'm so mad at myself for not realizing that this wasn't okay back then. He ends up cheating on me with his ex and tossed me out the door. Didn't talk to me anymore and said that we shouldn't talk anymore because we weren't together. Here's where it gets bad. Note, this happened over 5 years ago and I have a spotty memory of this time. New accounts pop up in the server we met on and start saying horrible things about me. Mary is a fat whale. Mary is an N-word. And more things of the sort. The account have names like Jerry Touches Kids or Big Fat Whale, etc. I had gotten in trouble with the server owners because it was my fault that people were saying bad things, as if I told them to spam things about me or something. The accounts also started to message me, telling me to kill myself, die, how I'm a whale, a whore, and more. I ended up blocking every single account and moving on with my life. Great, it was over with. Or so I thought it was. Fast forward a year to late summer 2019, everything starts up again. The messages, him telling people lies and rumors, and direct threats. I was sent unsolicited porn, death threats, slurs, and that I should kill myself because no one would care. At this point in time, I had undiagnosed depression and anxiety. Almost did kill myself. I went to therapy and tried to get over it. In 2020, right before quarantine happened, I got a boyfriend. I was very happy and came back out of my shell. He and I would play games on Discord together, and I joined more servers. Around 2 months later, I got another message. Someone had messaged me named Lily. It was a normal profile, and we were in a server together, so I thought nothing of it. She then had messaged me how I was, and I had never talked to her before, so I was confused. She said we had a long conversation about mental health the day before, so she wanted to make sure I was alright. I asked her who she was and what she was talking about, and she said something like, "Oh, you told me about this. You said you take medicine for schizophrenia, and you must have missed a dose. Are you off your meds?" I was extremely confused and scared because I had never talked to this person, and certainly did not have schizophrenia. After about 10 minutes of this charade, I realized it was Dennis. I blocked the account and didn't accept new friend requests. The next day I got hundreds of messages with the same contents I previously mentioned, the threats, porn, etc. I was terrified. I asked my boyfriend for help. He told me to make a new account and not friend any of the other mutual friends so he wouldn't be able to find me. I did, which cost an affiliated Twitch account that I spent years building. I changed all my accounts, deleted most, and made new ones. The messages found me again. I have no idea how. These new accounts weren't even tied to me. I got fed up and had asked a mutual friend I thought I could trust some personal information about Dennis to go to the police and get a possible restraining order or something. I didn't totally know how the police handled these issues. Months go by and nothing, until fall of 2021, in which Dennis messages me, calling me a stupid bitch and how he'll always find me, how I'm so fat and dumb and no one loves me. I isolated myself and deleted more accounts. I was never able to go to the police about this because I had no information like full name or address. It's been 2 years and every day I worry if he lives near me, if he knows where I live or go to school. I recently found out that he has a website and made YouTube videos. He has made YouTube videos referencing me in 2022. His copyright claim is something like Mary is a Fat Whale, Inc. I can't find it anymore. It was hell, and I'm still worried every day that he'll find me. I believe he has a Reddit account and could find this. I hope we don't ever meet again, Dennis. I wish you the worst. During summer 2022, my brother, 22, began dating his girlfriend, 23, and bringing her around my parents' house where I lived at the time. We'll call her Faye. She would attend holiday dinners, birthdays, things like that. Every time Faye came over, she started to look a little bit more like me, started wearing similar clothes and hairstyles, which previously we had completely different styles and aesthetics. My parents and I noticed it and made a few jokes about it between the three of us, but we didn't think too much of it. Maybe she just thought my style was cool, right? At the time I had platinum hair with the colors pink, blue, and purple in it. Faye began asking me for tips on how to dye her hair like mine, since I do mine at home. I thought it was innocent, so I gave her some instructions and told her what product I used. So the next time I saw Faye, her hair was identical to mine, and I couldn't be annoyed about it because, I gave her the advice. I have a necklace that I have worn every single day since I was 15. It's a choker with my name on it. Faye got the same exact necklace, but with her name on it. That was once again a little strange to me, but like everything else, I just brushed it off. But when she got fake blue contacts to match my eyes, that's when I seriously became unsettled by her. I did not have a friendship with her, so this was very weird behavior to me. She actually had me blocked on all social medias, which once again, I never understood. I did not know this person, nor why she would resent me for being her partner's sister. I wasn't even close with him. I actually avoided my brother unless he was at my parents' house, so her attitude towards me was just unexplainable. Even my parents were becoming weirded out by her actions. To this day, we still don't have an answer to why she was doing all this. In April 2023, my brother breaks up with Faye and kicks her out of their apartment. I don't know the details on why this happened. All I know about that situation is it's always been toxic between the two of them. Constant fighting and battling substance abuse. They were just messy from the start. 2 days after getting kicked out, Faye starts telling my brother that she's pregnant with his child. Both my brother and Faye are so young, and both have a history with substance abuse, benzos, and my brother was still actively using them at the time, so the pregnancy news horrified my family. We knew we wouldn't be stable enough to raise a child, so immediately we knew this was going to be something we would all end up pitching in to help with. At the time, my brother had a DUI, no car, in between jobs, and in and out of a mental hospital. Clearly, bringing a kid into this world was really going to cause turmoil for our family. My parents had purchased Plan B for the two of them more times than I can count, so at the end of the day, they were being irresponsible. So, Faye's pregnant with my brother's kid and is acting super strange towards me. I thought all of this was weird, but overall, I just felt horrible for the baby that was going to be brought into it. But like I said, up until this point, I wasn't overly concerned. This was all just petty drama. One night, I confided in a close friend and tell her what's going on with my brother and that I was going to become an aunt soon. My friend asked to see pictures of Faye, so we pulled up her Facebook profile. That's when I found out everything that she had been doing. Faye stole several items from my room, including clothes, blankets, sunglasses, perfumes, probably other stuff that I haven't even noticed yet. She had copied every single Spotify playlist that I made with the same titles, same songs, in the same order. She had the exact same room setup as me, with the same exact posters and tapestries, and even paintings that my grandmother painted. Faye actually painted identical ones. How much time did she have on her hands to do all of this shit? At this point, I was scared of her. She had copied everything about me to a T. My hair, my eyes, my outfits, my room, music. What the fuck? I'm a nail artist. She even started copying the exact sets of nails I was doing. I can't even imagine how much time she spent trying to be like me. It's fucking horrifying to think about. Now backtracking to July 2023. The place I worked received an email containing a few TikTok videos of me on Molly, acid, from back when I was in an active addiction, freshly 18, and posting recklessly on a viral account. I've been sober for 2 years now. In that email, the person was essentially trying to get me fired from my job for having a history of substance abuse. I was heartbroken. My boss had no idea about my history with substances, so not only was that embarrassing, but I feared losing my job. I couldn't imagine who would have sent this email. I don't have enemies or people out to get me, and I had no idea where to even begin as far as figuring out who was trying to sabotage me. Months later, I knew it was Faye. There was nobody else it could have been. Along with the email to my work, I received a text message from an unknown, untraceable phone number. It basically said, "I emailed some pretty damning videos of you to your work. If you get fired, I'm sure your parents will take care of you." Which leads me to believe that her motive behind all of this is to tear my family apart, cause problems between my parents and I, so that she could weasel her way in or something. I really just don't know. What else could she be trying to gain from doing all this? So that's the beef of it, basically. I just want to know if there's anything I can do other than staying silent on social medias. Faye is able to view my accounts through fake accounts that she has created. I'm honestly convinced sometimes that she put a camera in my room or tapped my phone. This whole thing has made me extremely paranoid. I have proof of everything she's copied, stolen from me. I just don't know if there's anything I could do with it. I was wondering if anyone had any ideas other than moving several states away and changing my entire identity to escape this person. So recently, I've had a few encounters with a delivery guy. First one, he asked me, "Are you Amy Duncan from 323 Citrus Avenue? You moved, huh?" All while smiling creepy. I thought he was just a delivery guy trying to do small talk, so I brushed him off. I am living alone, so I thought I was just overthinking by getting creeped out. Then I realized, after I thought about it, he was my neighbor from my previous address. He struck up a conversation with me saying he knows one of my friends. I don't like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk to him for long. But it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him. I felt like he was dangerous. After that, I was going out and saw him again delivering to my neighbor. I ignored him, trying to walk by. He saw me and recognized me, even though I was wearing a mask, and asked the same questions again. After that, since I don't go out much, I didn't see him that often. There was this one time, he was just standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by. Then I saw him in my Facebook friend request, and I just ignored him, but I was obviously creeped out. I told my friend. At first my friend said that she doesn't know anyone with that name, but his last name made him recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never talked. His family didn't know that he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, which was older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for a replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door being open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one in my apartment, so I sighed in relief, thinking maybe I left it open. I work night shift, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. Now that I'm thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I'm thinking about installing CCTV in the front of my apartment. I am scared though, because he knows my address. Update. My friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go, and then he'll take revenge on me. She also told me that he might be doing drugs, as told by his family, since he's acting suspicious. The most I can do right now is change my locks and install CCTV in front. Wish me luck, guys. Another update. Thank you. I'm overwhelmed by you guys worrying about me. So far, I haven't encountered him anymore, though I don't really go out that much. I sent my delivery name to my boyfriend's, maybe because his family knew and talked to him. I haven't caught anything strange around my house either. I think I'm in the safe zone now. I'm going to move to a different city in a few months, probably with my dog. My boyfriend is another problem since he can't move because his parents won't let him. If only he was as worried about me as you guys are. Maybe I'll just get another boyfriend. To give context, I used to be a 911 dispatcher for a small city. We dispatched all law, fire, EMS for the entire county, and within this county were multiple law agencies. I had been there for about 3 months or so when I met him. Let's call him Jake. Jake had recently transferred from a big department in California and landed himself randomly at our department. It didn't make much sense as to why he left California in the first place, but he always insisted that it was just time for him to move on to a smaller and less dangerous department. Him and I quickly became close and would chat almost every day after I got off shift. Within a few months, it became apparent that we both liked each other, and our flirting progressed into something more serious. Fast forward a few months later. It turns out that he was doing some inappropriate things to photos and videos of me while he was actively on duty. This and a few other things he had kept hidden on duty led to him losing his license and leaving. During the process of his termination, his sergeant had suggested I get a protective order against him, as he made threatening comments previously towards me, such as, "You better be telling the truth. I'll find out Tuesday if you're lying to me," etc. I had begun to fill out the paperwork and was told I had a temporary protective order on him in the meantime. But don't think I ever did. About 2 weeks after his termination, he calls me to catch up. The entire call is like an old friend to an old friend. "What are you doing for work? Do you have a boyfriend now?" But progressively turns more personal. "When does your shift end? What do you drive?" Being 18 and naive, I treated him like I always had, answering his questions. I contacted his old department afterwards, as the sergeant told me to let him know if I was ever contacted again. But they turned me away pretty quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. With that, I blocked Jake. Roughly a month later, I get a call from a new number, and it's Jake. Once again, he wants to meet up and catch up, but this time he so casually goes on about this new house he wanted to buy in my neighborhood, knowing it's my neighborhood. I never told him where I lived in town, let alone what specific neighborhood. During this call, he progressively got more aggressive as well, making statements such as, "If I knew I was getting it canned, I should have just had my way with you." He half-heartedly joked about getting a hotel room just for me, and that was that. A few days later, he FaceTimed me, and once again came off simply as wanting to catch up, as he was sick. Midway through our seemingly normal conversation, he makes it apparent that he's touching himself the entire time. Keep in mind, nothing suggestive was mentioned, and our conversation at this point was about his new dog. I blocked him once again, but he tried to follow my social media, and now I've started to see him in my area. Last I knew, he lived about 30 to 45 minutes in the opposite direction from me. Am I reading too much into this, or should I generally consider this stalking? I'm a female, 20. When I was younger, maybe 13 or 14, I was walking to town with my mother. I lived in a smallish town in England. It was a quick walk, 15 minutes, but about 5 minutes after leaving the house, I had one of the most unsettling encounters ever. Whilst walking, there was this man approaching us. Nothing weird at this point. I thought he would walk past us like everyone else. However, this random man leaned in towards me as he was walking past and whispered something to me. I remember it being creepy, somewhere along the lines of him knowing where I lived. It was subtle and happened quickly. I was shocked, especially since my mom was right next to me. Bold move from a creepy guy. I recall the man being possibly in his late 20s, kind of scruffy looking, a little chubby, with longish brown hair and a beard, but I knew I had never seen him before this point. I waited a few seconds for us to distance ourselves from the stranger, then turned to my mom, completely freaked out, and quietly asked if she had heard what the guy said to me. She said she didn't. I thought maybe I misinterpreted the situation or misheard him. We kind of brushed it off and continued our day. I felt uneasy but tried not to think about it. The rest of the day was fairly normal until the morning after, when my dad was talking to our neighbor. The neighbor told my dad during the early hours of the morning there was a man lurking right outside our houses for some time, hovering around my dad's and neighbor's car. Now this is really weird because we live in a kind of closed off area. The only people we see outside our homes are neighbors, but even they wouldn't come right up to our doors, especially not at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Even delivery drivers can't find our house most of the time because we're hidden away. This has never happened before and never happened again after this, at least to our knowledge. Of course, you can imagine how absolutely terrified I was to hear this. I explained to my dad what had happened the day before and reminded my mom, kind of a "I told you so" moment. I felt so scared to be in my own home. I remember calling a friend talking about the situation. We researched about what we could do, but there wasn't really any action we could take. Just had to be observant and cautious, I guess. I can't remember much about what happened after that, but I never saw that man again. The whole situation creeps me out, and it doesn't make sense. The man outside my house wasn't confirmed to be the same man that walked past us earlier, as it was too dark to make out any discernible features, but it sure is an amazing coincidence if so. Never knew where to talk about this experience, but I figured it belongs here. I'd love to hear your opinions and theories. When I was 18 and newly graduated, I ran into some issues with my attempts to enroll in college and also had a hard time finding a job in my area in the meantime, which led me to having to sign on at a job center. They determined that I was too shy to succeed in interviews and placed me in a group that was supposed to teach me interview skills in order to fix that. The group ended up ultimately being a complete waste of time. I honestly think they just put me in the wrong group or just needed an extra member and made an excuse to throw me in there to make the numbers. But that's not really relevant to my story. And the other group members didn't do much to help my shyness, since they were all men who were at least 4 decades older than me and obviously didn't share any of my interests. Unfortunately, I ended up gaining the attention of one of the members I wanted nothing to do with. I don't actually remember the man's name at this point, but I think it's something generic like John, so that's what I'll call him. John immediately got off on the wrong foot with the rest of the group when he interrupted the instructor during our introduction to the course to complain that him being there was useless, since he will be retiring in a few years anyways, and no one would want to hire someone who spent over 10 years in prison. When that didn't get him the reaction he wanted, I assumed the rest of the group thought he was just attention seeking, and the instructor had heard similar things before from people who weren't happy about being in that course. He waited until we had been given paperwork to complete, and then turned to the man next to him and loudly explained that the prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but that she was a lying bitch and he never put his hand on her, that she didn't even have any bruises on her at the trial or evidence of bruises or other injuries before that either. But because she was a woman, the judge automatically believed her and sent him to jail. This immediately set me on edge. I'm not an expert when it comes to the law, but I do watch a lot of true crime channels on YouTube, and I never heard of a sentence for over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly never happened and didn't leave visible injuries. Either John was lying and had severely beat his wife to the point of putting her in the hospital, or he was arrested for other charges and was covering up what he actually went to prison for. I immediately decided I wanted nothing to do with him, regardless of which one it was, and would avoid interacting with him as much as possible outside of polite hellos and passing him things if asked. Like I said before, I didn't really interact much with the other members of the group because of their ages. I attended the first half of the meeting in the morning, spent the dinner break in the library while the men snuck off to a pub, and then went home immediately after the second half was over. No one ever asked me how I spent my breaks, and since the pub and library were in the opposite directions from each other and couldn't be seen from the front of the building that the group met in because of the way the streets were arranged, there should be no way for any of them knowing where I had been, which made what happened next even more worrying. About halfway through the course, there was a day where I had bumped into a friend on my dinner break and decided to put off visiting the library until the course was over for the day and catch up with them instead. I spent at least a quarter of an hour there before heading to a desk to check out my books and ended up being drawn into a conversation by the librarian who had noticed I was checking out books related to a franchise he also enjoyed and that was getting a new movie the next year. There were only a handful of other people in the library, so I didn't see anything wrong with talking to a friendly man around my age who shared my interests after 8 hours of boredom and paperwork. We had been talking for 15 minutes when he suddenly glanced over my shoulder, looking confused and concerned, and was just opening his mouth to say something when someone grabbed me by my shoulders. My friends and family know that I hate having my shoulders touched without warning and would have never done that to me, so I immediately knew that whoever was touching me was a stranger and knocked their hand away while turning around and backing up into the librarian's desk. It was John. He was standing directly behind me with a huge smile on his face, and as soon as I turned around, he made a joke about knowing that he would find me there and how I practically lived there before chattering at me as if we were close friends. I was just completely confused. It was obvious that he hadn't just coincidentally bumped into me from the way that he was talking. But John had been kept behind while the group was heading out because he had filled out his paperwork incorrectly. And as I mentioned before, you can't see the library from the building, so he shouldn't have had any way of seeing where I had gone. It had almost been a half an hour since I left the building, so if he had left not long after me and had just seen me go in while walking in the same direction, he would have came inside by then. The only way it made sense for him to know where to look for me and joke that I practically lived in there would be that he somehow learned I was going to the library during dinner breaks, known that I hadn't gone that day, and guessed that I would go after the meeting instead. What made that even stranger than it already was is the fact that John never showed any interest in me during the group sessions and mostly ignored me the way I ignored him unless we were forced to interact for whatever reason. So why was he following me into another building to start a conversation out of nowhere and acting like we were close? While John was still talking, the librarian leaned in to ask me if I knew the man because he obviously saw my negative reaction by being touched by John. And when I briefly explained the situation to him, he asked John politely to please leave me alone or leave the building. John refused and tried to tell the man that we were friends, completely ignoring the fact that I had just said we weren't and how ridiculous it would be to claim that an 18-year-old girl and a 50 to 60-year-old man were friends in the first place. When the librarian asked again, and I outright told him that harassing other customers wasn't acceptable and he would be removed from the building if he refused to leave me alone. John smiled and agreed to leave in the tone you use when humoring a child before walking out and very obviously stationed himself right outside the doors, waiting for me to leave too. The librarian was clearly concerned and asked for the full story of what was going on, and I told him, including my suspicions that John had been following me around without my knowledge to know that I would be there in the first place. He suggested I stay in the library until his break so he could walk me to the bus stop to make sure John left me alone. But it wouldn't be for several hours, and if I had waited, I wouldn't have gotten home in time to change and head to another meeting I had later in that evening. So he asked me to at least come in the next time I was there, to let him know I was safe, and he reluctantly watched me leave. John immediately stepped into my personal space when I got outside, jokingly asking me what the librarian's problem was and still acting like we were friends. I tried to walk around him without answering him and head to the bus station to go home, but he grabbed me by my arm and reminded me that there was a closer stop for our bus. When I told him that we aren't going on the same bus because I'd never seen him on the same one as me, he corrected me and said that we both need number 3 and told me where he lived, which was in fact on the same bus route as me. Although I was still tempted to walk away and go to the station instead, and possibly sneakily get on a different bus and just walk the rest of the way home, it was very clear to me that he was going to follow me if I did, because he still had a hold of my arm, refusing to let go when I tried to pull away. And there were several dark alleys on the way that I had no intention of going anywhere near while in his company. When I agreed to go to the closer stop, he let go of me and started walking at my side, chattering like we were good friends again. John kept walking when we reached the stop, which was odd, but I was hoping that the lack of response to anything he said made him give up and decide to leave me alone, or that he had mixed up that stop with one further along and I could run while his back was turned. No luck. As soon as he realized I wasn't following him anymore, John came back, frowning as if he was confused and asking me, "I thought we were going to go get coffee together." Shocked, I told him blatantly no. He kept pushing, trying to convince me that I had agreed to go with him, and when that didn't work, he switched tactics and claimed I had mentioned while leaving the classroom that I wanted some coffee, so he thought we could go together. That was an obvious lie too, since I don't drink coffee, and I told him so. John's only answer was to say I didn't have to get coffee and kept pushing me to go to the cafe with him. I firmly told him no, and apparently he took that as me not wanting to drink in public because he attempted to invite me to his flat. If that wasn't weird enough, he started telling me that if there was a naked girl on the couch when we got there, I'm not to worry because that's his 18-year-old daughter. Yeah, because an 18-year-old girl is definitely going to lounge around naked on her father's furniture in front of him, right? Other people at the stop were staring at us now, and I took the opportunity to point out that I was also 18 and firmly tell John that I don't want to go with him to his flat and to leave me alone. He completely ignored the last part and tried to claim that I was lying about my age and that I was at least 29, when most people at that time still mistook me for being in my early teens at first glance. The bus arrived at that moment and I got on as quickly as possible, thinking that I would be safe there and the driver would throw him off if need be. No. When I sat down on the aisle seat to stop John from sitting next to me, he physically shoved me across the seat, pinning me against the window to the point I could barely move, and pressing his knees up against the seat in front of him to make sure I had no room to get past him unless he allowed it. The only way for me to get out would have involved me straddling his lap, since the seat in front of us were occupied. I loudly told him to move and leave me alone, but he ignored me. He continued trying to convince me to come back to his flat. Although people gave me uncomfortable looks, when I tried to make eye contact with some of the men in hopes that they would help, they would look away as if they hadn't noticed or suddenly become very interested in their phones. I spent the ride huddled up against the window trying to touch him as little as possible, and was ignored again when I shouted for him to stop touching me, because he kept putting his hands on my thigh as high up as he could without directly groping me. No one did anything about it, but he stopped touching me after that. He had apparently also given up on convincing me to go back to his flat that day. But when we were coming up to my apartment block, he pointed it out to me, physically turning my face when I refused to look, told me his apartment number and tried to give me a kiss goodbye on the cheek, which I dodged, before getting off the bus and knocking on the opposite window to try to get my attention so he could wave at me. When the bus set off again, several people started loudly talking about how disgusting he was, and that men like him should be reported, while refusing to look in my direction where I sat shaking and seething in my seat. And other than the awkward, "So, are you alright?" from the bus driver, just as I was about to step off the bus, no one bothered to check on me. As soon as I got home, I sent an email to the instructor, telling her I wanted to switch groups and never see that man, explaining what he had done. She read it but ignored it for an entire week until I sent a follow-up, threatening to get police involved if they forced me to interact with that man again. Their solution was to tell me that I could leave the course early instead, essentially kicking me out as if I was the problem. I bumped into that man not long afterwards, and he tried to ask me why I hadn't been attending that group anymore, admitting that he asked the instructor but they had refused to tell him. But I managed to get away and lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few more times passing in the years since, but fortunately he has never noticed me or approached me again, and I hope it stays that way. As I was walking home from work last night, about halfway to my house, a disheveled man who looked like he was either homeless or extremely down on his luck crossed paths with me from the other side of the sidewalk. He had initially been walking in the opposite direction, but as soon as he saw me, he immediately turned around and started following me. He began rambling incoherently and aggressively, and his words were so slurred that I hardly understood a thing he said. All I could make out was something about a care package and look at you. It was obvious that the man was under the influence of multiple substances. I quickened my pace and tried to avoid eye contact with this man, and he was getting agitated that I wasn't paying attention to him. When my walking speed got too quick for his inebriated stumbling to keep up with, he stopped talking and instead just began trying to follow me. I kept looking over my shoulder at him, and every time I saw him, he would either stop or try to duck behind a bush. Finally, I started outright sprinting and looking for a spot that I could hide myself. I came up to my local mosque and tried to sneak around the corner into the parking lot where there was a tree that I hid behind. While hiding there, I frantically dialed 911. I told them that a strange man was displaying unstable behavior and was trying to follow me, and described my location, myself, and then the man to them. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on the way, but while I was waiting for them, I saw a figure heading up the sidewalk in front of the parking lot I was hiding in. Panic immediately filled me until the passerby was close enough where I could see that it wasn't the same man who had just bothered me, and they turned out to be harmless. Mere moments after this, the cops arrived to where I was, pulled up next to the tree, and motioned for me to come over and talk to them. The officer driving the vehicle asked me standard questions, a description of the incident, where I was when it happened, etc. While we were talking, he spotted a man in another parking lot down the street, not too far from where I first encountered the creep. He asked me if that was a man I had encountered, and it was hard to tell between the darkness and the distance, but I was pretty sure it was, and it appeared that an officer got out to talk to the man. The officer I had been talking to asked me how far from my house I was, and I told him that I was pretty close to my street at this point. He assured me that it should be safe to walk the rest of the way home, and that they had other cop cars patrolling the area. I thanked him and finished walking home without further incident, thank God. Shortly after I got home, I saw that I got a text from my boyfriend that read, "Are you okay?" The text had been sent around the same time the incident was occurring, as if he could sense that I was in a fearful situation. I replied back to him, telling him what happened. He told me that he had gotten yelled at by a homeless man earlier too. I described the creep I encountered to him, and asked him if he thought it was the same guy. He said he didn't think so. We also had a brief phone call to make sure each other was okay. I let him know that I was home safe, and he told me that he was in a vehicle with the group, so he was safe too. I don't know what the cops ended up doing about the man, but I hope he stays as far away from me as possible. I'm a 31-year-old female. When I was 16, I was in choir at my high school that had performed for a lot of different events around town. One of them was to sing at the middle school sporting events. The middle school in my hometown is just about a half-mile away from my childhood home, so whenever we had events there, I walked. This one I think it was in November. We had to sing at a basketball game, and it was obviously dark when I was able to leave. Normally, I wasn't allowed to walk home at night, but for choir I was given permission unless I felt unsafe. But there wasn't any reason for me to be creeped out at first, so I started my walk. Just down from the middle school is a stretch of road with almost no streetlights that has always creeped me out when walking. I crossed quickly and had a fast pace going, as I am a naturally paranoid human. About 2 minutes into the dark zone, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I at first figured it was a jogger, but they made no attempt to pass me, and just stayed a comfortable 10-foot distance. They began whistling a jaunty tune, which at first I thought was fun. At this point I wasn't super scared, perhaps because of the happy whistling tune, but I noticed the footsteps began to speed up. There were no cars on the road, and given the lack of light, when I turned around all I could see was a silhouette shrouded in darkness. At that realization I quickened my pace to barely under a run. The whistling continued, getting more breathless as this person began to run after me. I looked back and saw a dark figure coming at me full speed, and in terror, began running frantically as well. I will never forget those last moments running through my dark subdivision, hearing his whistling and footsteps getting closer and closer. This person followed me to my door. I ran inside and locked the front, checked all the doors, and went upstairs to my bedroom. From the window, I could still see his silhouette and could hear him whistling. I slept with a knife that night. I've wanted to tell this story for years, and now I finally have a way to share it. This is going to be a long read, but it will tell you about the scariest experience of my life. I was 15 years old, living in a medium-sized city in North Florida. About 60,000 people, but some areas were really spread out and rural. Don't think of like New York City or anything, more like a town with a lot of houses spread out over a huge area and condensed shopping centers. I was a bit of a punk that my parents had a hard time controlling, so that meant I basically snuck out constantly and was always riding my bike around the city at all hours of the night with my friends, fighting and constantly causing trouble. For reference, I was probably 5'10", 150 pounds. My next door neighbors were my best friends. Let's call them Nick and Tim. Nick was younger than us and probably 5'5" and 140 pounds. And Tim was 5'8" and easily 210. Nick and Tim were brothers, only a year or so apart. One night, Tim had texted me around 1 a.m. asking me to ride bikes with him and his brother to his girlfriend's house so he can get lucky. I remember being hesitant because of how long the ride was going to be. I just looked it up, and it's 9.6 miles from my friend's house to her street, but Tim begged and begged for me to go until I agreed. Our city had a curfew, meaning any police in the area that saw you and assumed that you were a minor would stop you and possibly give you a ticket and bring you home. That meant we had to be careful about being seen by cars going by. Well, the bike ride to her house went by without any issues. We took our time, joked around, smoked a little pot, and generally enjoyed the ride together. We ran out of what little pot we had on the way and finally got to his girlfriend's house after what felt like an hour. Tim snuck around the back to go in, and Nick and I just sat on an electrical box and talked. Maybe 30 minutes went by and Tim triumphantly snuck out of the house bragging about his time there and says we should head out. Annoyed of how long it took and nearly sober, we both agreed. The first mile of the ride went by smoothly, but things changed. We had just passed a closed, decently sized shopping center and church. We rode by it slowly, in zero rush at all. After we passed it, it led to a long stretch of road with woods and canals on each side. 2 lanes on each side separated by palm trees and landscaping in the middle. There were sidewalks on both sides, and on the right side another road connects to a pathway. We were riding on the right-hand sidewalk. Off in the distance we saw a very tall, older man wearing a yellow raincoat and a large backpack. He was walking back and forth on the sidewalk under the streetlight on the corner of the parkway and the side street. We all went silent as we got closer. I don't think he could have seen or heard us, as there were no lights over us and there were sprinklers going off in the median. I remember hearing him dragging his feet across the ground and muttering. He was dragging his feet almost like he was trying to brush away the concrete to find something underneath it. The mumbling was incoherent and frantic. Honestly, it made my heart sink into my stomach and knot up. I couldn't understand anything he was saying, and the only way to get home was to go by him. Nick says, "Yo, let's cross the street and get onto the other sidewalk." Tim and I agreed. I remember this so distinctly. We crossed the landscape medium, and a jet of sprinkler water hit me directly in the face and got into my mouth and eyes. It smelled like sulfur and tasted horribly. On the other side, we could hear his mumbling and scraping of his feet clearer. I can now see more details about him. He was smoking a cigarette and was probably 6'5", had a huge green backpack, was extremely skinny, had long gray hair, and was wearing combat boots with blue ripped jeans, and that he had a full white beard. He didn't seem to notice us until we were directly across from him. We all had our eyes locked on his direction when he suddenly stopped walking, talking, and scraping his feet. He looked up from the ground and let out this god-awful screech. It was like he tried to say 100 words at once. None of us knew what he was trying to say. After the initial scream, I could make out, "What the fuck are you doing?" It startled us. We were now 25 yards away from him, and then he screams, "What the fuck are you looking at?" I was a foolish teenager. I piped up to say something smart, and Tim, riding next to me, grabbed onto me and said, "Don't say a fucking word." So I didn't. In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't. He kept screaming in our direction, and we kept riding. The further we rode, the fainter the screaming got. Then it stopped. We crossed the street again to the other side of the road, and made it about a mile down that road, all of us on edge. We glanced over our shoulders constantly to make sure he wasn't following us. We talked briefly about it, how strange it was, etc., but we were glad it was over with, or so we thought. Nick and Tim were riding in front of me when I thought I heard something behind me. I turned around, and there he was, maybe an arm's length away from me, headed directly for me. The yellow raincoat hood was pulled over his head and buttoned. The guy was standing up on his mountain bike pedaling as hard as he could. We locked eyes and he started screaming. Screaming. He screamed not words, not any language, just a fucking constant scream, as loud as he could. I have chills just writing this now as a 25-year-old grown man with a wife and a baby. If someone ever illustrated that image that I saw, I would probably have a panic attack. I screamed, "He's right behind us!" and stood up and pedaled as hard as I could. I think we all did. And he was right behind us the whole time, screaming. Every so often he would get right up on top of us, screaming and trying to knock us off our bikes. I don't know how long we rode with him behind us, but it felt like an eternity. I think age played a factor because he must have got tired, which led us to get ahead a bit. Exhausted, we pulled into a neighborhood and started cutting through yards trying to lose him. We jumped off our bikes and decided if he's still chasing us, we would make our stand together and fight. It was like a hive mind decision, all too tired to keep running. It was our only option. We waited for him, but he never came. I don't even remember hearing him. I still can't recall when we lost him. I called my house phone, waking both my parents up in the process, and told my dad about the situation. He told me to get home and figure it out. I asked to talk to my mother, and she yelled at me on the phone and refused to come pick me up as I stood in the middle of the street hoping the crackhead didn't come to kill us all. I got home with Nick and Tim in tow, who asked if they could crash in my room. Of course, I said yes. I think we still have some weird feelings about that night, and we've never spoke about it again. I don't know what he wanted. He was clearly on drugs, but it makes me wonder if he wanted to rob us, or worse. I was 22 and living on my own for the first time when this happened. Mid-90s. I had just gotten off work, 11 p.m. To reach my apartment building, I could either walk on the sidewalk, lit with street lamps, decently trafficked, or cut across the communal garden, pitch black, set back from the street. I saved about 1 whole minute of walking time by cutting through this communal garden, but being young and stupid, a lot of times I took the shortcut. That night, I got a weird feeling to not take the shortcut. I kept on the sidewalk, but there was no one else around. When I got past the garden, all of a sudden this large man pops up out of the exit path. There's no way he could have been in front of me or just behind me as I was walking. I would have noticed him. The only logical explanation is he had been hiding in that pitch black garden. A drunk who's been sleeping it off? No, my body was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I began walking faster. My dad had always taught me to carry my keys in my fist with a key pointed out in case I needed to punch someone, so I had that. But I'm 5'4" and probably weighed 110 pounds. This guy was tall and big. My only chance was to outpace him. I'm speed walking at this point, and I feel like he's matching my pace, or even getting closer. He's breathing heavily. I feel this angry energy coming off of him, but my apartment building is right there, so I just put on a burst of speed. When I reach my entrance, 2 people are leaving and hold the door open for me, and him. I don't know why I didn't tell them that I thought this guy was following me. My mind froze, and I was just trying to get inside my apartment. Plus, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was visiting someone in the building. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Don't be paranoid. Besides, it only took a couple seconds for them to open the door. I had missed my chance. I'm climbing the stairs as fast as I can. It's a 3-story building and I live on the 3rd floor. He's climbing the stairs too, still right behind me. I get to my floor, which has 4 apartments on the right side, where I live, and 4 on the left. I pass by apartments 1 and 2. He's still right behind me. I stop at apartment 3, where I live, and he stops in front of apartment 4, where I know he doesn't. He hasn't said anything, just breathing hard, and I think there's no way I'm gonna open my apartment door and have him push me inside and rape me, or worse. He also hasn't knocked on the door of apartment 4. Worth noting is that the apartment is U-shaped. Mine and my neighbor's door are very close together, so I bang on my own apartment door as loud as I could, but yell my neighbor's name. "Hey Kevin, let me in." This startles the guy, even more so when my own apartment door doesn't open, but Kevin's does. Kevin sees the guy standing right in front of his door and asks him what he wants. The guy starts mumbling something about the wrong apartment, but I have my own door open so fast that I'm inside my place in a flash, locking the door behind me. I grab my cordless phone to call the police, but I hear Kevin through the door telling the guy that he needs to leave. The guy does. Kevin knocks on my door, asks if I'm okay. I thank him, say that I am, but I'm inside and I'm frozen, adrenaline pumping, scared. I thank him again and tell him to have a good night, lock my door again. I have my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but I start to rationalize it again. What exactly happened? A guy followed me home, but then said he had the wrong apartment. Are the cops gonna care about something minor like this? I try to calm myself down, but I'm also berating myself. Why didn't I run the instant I felt him following me? Why didn't I tell the people we passed at the front door when I thought I was being chased? Worse, why didn't I tell Kevin the second he opened his door and saved me? He could have let me inside of his apartment, and we could have called the police together, but because of my stupidity, everything felt so ambiguous, and I was questioning myself. A couple weeks later, I'm visiting my grandparents, and my grandfather is reading the paper. He tells me a woman was raped in the apartment building across the street from mine. It's the same guy. He had multiple convictions of sexual assault and had recently been released on parole. I'm an 18-year-old male. One night, I was at the gym around 10 p.m. because I worked all day and my gym stays open all night. I was casually working out as I always have. Out of nowhere, this very short Hispanic guy comes out of nowhere and asks me what I'm doing later. Thinking it was very odd, I decided to ignore him and act like I couldn't hear him because of my headphones. He kept asking me, but eventually left. When I finished my workout, I went into the locker room to get my keys and check myself out in the mirror. As I entered the locker room, the guy was sitting on the bench staring at me, like watching my every move. So I skipped looking at myself in the mirror, grab my keys, and go out of the bathroom quick. I could see that he starts following me as I head to the urinal, so I quickly resort to a stall. When I left the stall, he's staring at me from the urinal. I ignore him and start leaving the gym, but he still follows me. Once again, he asked me what I'm doing tonight and what my name is, but this time I couldn't pretend not to hear him, so I just said, "Sorry man, I'm not interested," and quickly got to my car and drove away. A week later, I had to work this day, so I went to the gym around 10 p.m. and everything was normal. Was working out, saw some friends, and then I saw the same guy from a week ago staring at me while laying against the empty wall. I tried to ignore him, but every machine or workout I do, he starts following me. I stay by some friends so he hopefully won't come near me. When those friends left, so did he, so I thought it was safe. I get my stuff together and head out around 11:30. At this point, my phone has died. I was a little worried, but then started to freak out because when I approached my car, there was this rose in my truck handle, driver's side. I actually started to run and went back in to get assistance from someone working there because I didn't feel like dying that day. After removing it, I sped home as fast as I could. A day after, I had a normal workout, didn't see him until I went to my truck. He was parked right next to me, standing in front of his car. When I got in, I could see him watching me the whole time. Now, every time I go late, he's either waiting for me or asking me weird questions. I talked to the workers about this, and they say he's not from here and is just trying to be nice. But I can't help but wonder why he doesn't get the hint when I tell him no all the time. I wake up hours early in the morning to go to the gym now, but when I go late, he's still there watching me every time. What should I do? Another time, there's a rose on my windshield and a phone wire wrapped around my handle. Here's a picture. Then more recently, he added me on Snapchat. I don't know how he knows my name or how he knew that car was mine in the first place. So this happened to me a long time ago, but I never forgotten about it, as it was one of the strangest encounters my family and I have ever had. One time as a child, I went with my family to the grocery store. It was our monthly trip to stock up on groceries, so we were going to be there for a while. I was about 12 at the time, so by that age, I had a good understanding of how to read people. We started in the produce aisle, and suddenly a strange man caught my eye. He was standing there awkwardly close to us, sort of fake browsing the vegetables. His body language seemed off. He was standing with his back to us, but something seemed strange about the way he was positioned. As we slowly moved down the aisle, he would slowly rotate so his back was always facing us. As we got closer, I could tell that he was wearing those see-behind glasses, those gimmick sunglasses that have hidden mirrors on the inside of the lenses, so you can see behind yourself. He had a dirty gray zip-up jacket on, and long messy hair. He had to be in his 40s. Our shopping went on, and wherever we went, I would see him standing there staring at me from across the grocery store. He would keep his distance from us, but always be within eyesight, no matter where we were in the store. About 30 minutes in, my mom still hasn't noticed it, but he was starting to really creep me out. My mom didn't believe me at first. Eventually, we got to the refrigerator aisles, and this is where it got weird. Whatever aisle we were in, he would quickly pace past us occasionally. At this point, he wasn't even trying to look like he was shopping. My mom and sis were starting to notice this and also seemed concerned. At one point, we were grabbing something off one of the shelves, and I could see him just standing on the opposite aisle, peeking through the shelves at us. His sunglasses were still on, but now his hood was up. We started to walk faster and do some random zigzags around the store to see if he was really following us and to try to lose him. But he would keep up, all in a very sneaky way at that. He would always be on the opposite end of the aisle, but he kept up with us the whole time. By this point, my mom was really concerned, so we pushed the cart to the customer service area to talk to the manager about it. By this point, we lost him. We informed the manager, and she was very helpful. She actually went to go find the guy and talk to him. We waited at the counter until she paced back to us with a confused look on her face. She walked up to my mother and told us, "He said, you're his mom." The manager rang us up and said we should leave, and then they would escort the strange man. We walked up to the car, staying close to our mother, when we were met with a horrible sight. The man was standing across the parking lot, across from our car, with his head slightly tilted with a big grin on his face. We floored it out of there, but we could see him just standing there watching us leave. Whoever the guy was in the sunglasses, let's not meet again. This story takes place a few years ago when I was still with my ex-girlfriend. I'm a 22-year-old male. I was 17 or 18 at this moment. I was living with my parents and lived in a little town of 300 people. We had 3 farms in this town, which includes lots of fields. We had a habit of walking those fields thanks to a little path which was really old. There's a place for only one car, truck, or tractor. It was in the afternoon, 5 or 6 p.m., and we decided to eat some stuff on the field near the road, so we could see the road, and the people on the road can see us. The field, which belongs to my neighbor, who are okay with the fact that we're there, is separated from the road thanks to a barbed wire. It's a few miles from my parents' house. We smoked weed, we drank, we eat, and listened to music. Everything is alright. However, at one point, a car parks in the middle of the road, and a guy went out of his car and is doing stuff in the bushes. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, the dude is just picking stuff like nuts or whatever, because it's the end of the summer, but I keep an eye on him. I'm talking with my girlfriend just like I did all afternoon until then, and I look back at him. The guy is standing there behind his car, and he's looking right at us, motionless. I don't say anything, and I look back at my girlfriend. I give it another minute, and then look back. The guy has moved. He is now on the other side of his car, and the same thing. No motion, just looking at us. The same process is about to repeat 2 or 3 times, with him in different locations around his car. I have chills, and I'm thinking the situation isn't normal at all. The guy suddenly went back into his car and moves away. At this moment, I told my girlfriend, pick up your things, we're moving. She thinks I'm kind of overreacting, thinking I'm paranoid because of the weed we smoked, but she listens to me. We're back on the road, going the other way the guy went. The road is a circle, every way leads back to my house. And guess who turned around and is coming right behind us with his car, still looking at us while driving. He keeps driving past and turns around once again to keep staring at us. This process repeats 2 times. At this moment, my girlfriend told me I was right, so we took down his plate and tried to call my parents, but no one is answering. The last time this guy passes, I can clearly see something on his passenger seat, but I don't know what. But at that moment, my neighbor came right behind him. I stopped my neighbor and told her what we just witnessed. She gets us in the truck and takes me back to my house. My dad is a cop. I told him the plate, and he looked into it. The car belonged to a grandma and was stolen. End of this part of the story. A few weeks later, as every day, I go to take the bus to the next town, which is about 7 minutes away on bike. It was still dark because it's pretty early in the morning. When I left my parents' home on my bike, I noticed a light behind me. It was his car. I don't know how he knew I was there. Maybe it's pure bad luck for me, but I'm 100% sure it was his car. He followed me until I took a path which a car could not use. Only bikes and pedestrians can take it. I turned off my light and drove until I got to the bus stop in complete dark in order not to be seen by this guy. I kept doing it this way for the next 2 years, and I've never seen him again. To the guy who stole grandma's car and stalked me and my girlfriend, let's not meet again. I usually get over creepy encounters fairly quickly, But this one was quite different from the rest. I go by the rule, be nice to everyone, because you never know who could be a secret serial killer. And that has worked out well for me the majority of the time. Although this time, it's probably what got me into that situation. When I was 18, I worked as a lifeguard at a small pool. Nothing fancy. I was basically just a babysitter to all ages. When adults got bored looking after the kids, they sometimes sought me out, for some reason, to have free therapy sessions. Mothers and fathers talking about their hardships. I know I worked as a lifeguard, but I can't save that kind of life. One day, a 50-year-old man with his 2 kids came to the pool. As many people did, he went up to me and we started talking. It started off as some small talk, like how he didn't let his children eat ketchup because it has the properties to remove rust from metals. But as the hours went by, he started talking badly about one of his kids, how she was overweight, had anger issues, and was worried about the boys when no one would ever look at her. I'm not gonna lie, that last statement made me go quiet, and I tried to somewhat reason with him to not speak like that about his daughter. He seemed to listen to what I had to say, so I was happy that I could possibly help his kid in some way. Having a parent like that would have given anyone a hard time. The next day he came back extremely happy, telling me that I was so good with kids because my talk had apparently helped him. He then began the day by trash-talking his ex-wife to oblivion, like how she had most custody over the kids, and that the kids only ate fast food at her house. I didn't say much because I felt like it wasn't my place to speak, and I didn't want to create any unnecessary drama at my workplace. But what set the first red flag in motion was when the conversation suddenly shifted into him wanting a young wife. It was as if he had trash-talked his ex to get me to understand he was single and interested in a relationship with me. The days went by and he continued to visit the pool every day. To some extent, I had a feeling that he now came every day just to see me. I was fairly creeped out by this thought, so I tried to ignore it and just do my work. As the days passed, he started asking more and more personal questions like, where do you usually go grocery shopping? Is there a cafe close to where you live? As I was fairly sure he was trying to figure out where I lived, so I kindly deflected all his questions with something very obscure. During my last work week, I had the afternoon shift. I asked my colleague who was in the morning shift if anything had happened that day that I should be aware of. He told me that they had banned a man from entering the pool because he had reached around the counter at the small pool shop where the coworker kept their personal things. Apparently, he was denied by my coworker to get a look at our work calendar, so he had to try to get a glance at it in a more illegal manner. The last week I saw him twice at the end of my shifts, standing near the pool entrance. The second time I saw him, I reported him to pool security. After that, I never saw him again. So I hope we never meet again, you creep. So this happened about 5 years ago. A little background first. My dad had trained me in how to keep calm in stressful or life and death situations. I did the same with my kids. My kids were 12 and 13 years old, and in the back seat, my elderly mom was right next to me. We had just finished our errands, and I asked if anyone wanted to go to a popular small lake that has a one-way road going around it, about a 1-mile circular, before going home. They immediately wanted to do so, mostly to see the new duck chicks. There's a maximum speed limit of 20 miles per hour, and several places to exit if you don't want to go completely around. The reason for the low speed limit is a lot of people go here for fishing, walking, or jogging. We got to see the baby ducks and slowed down to stop a few times and looked and awed over the teeny ducks. There wasn't any cars behind us yet. I was halfway around when this huge man in a big truck went racing along the side of the lake, about 50 miles per hour. There's a lot of screaming from people racing to get out of its way. Immediately, I start speeding up to exit off the road. I was almost there when I heard the truck engine. My mom screamed. The kids were frozen in fear. As I looked in the rearview mirror, he was coming fast on me. he slammed on the brakes and just came inches from hitting the back of my car. Then started following me aggressively and screaming all sorts of insults at me. I sped up and got out of there, but he kept following me. My mom was freaking out. My kids were terrified, but doing the breathing exercises I taught them to keep themselves calm. I yelled at my mom to shut the fuck up. I threw my cell phone to my oldest son and told him to call 911 and inform the dispatcher that we were headed to the police station and to please have a few cops waiting for us. He did so, and at the time screaming in fear as this man went down the side street and turned back to ram us off the road. He gets in front of me and slams on the brakes, parked blocking the road, or to do a pit maneuver. I later thanked God that my dad had been in the military and taught me maneuvers to avoid aggressive drivers. I was able to avoid all the things he was doing. The dispatcher heard the terrified screams every time I had to brake hard or swing the car around. I was cussing like crazy. We made it to the police station, and there were several cops waiting for us. The guy was so angry that I don't think he realized where we were. He parked right behind me to block me in, got out of his truck screaming around to my side, got even more angry when the cops wouldn't let him near me. He swung out and punched one of the cops so hard in the head that he was knocked out. He got tasered and sprayed as he was tackled down. It took several cops to hold him down when he suddenly went quiet. He suddenly realized just where he was and began struggling again, saying that they couldn't arrest him because he didn't know they were cops at the moment. I let out a relieved breath once he was in the backseat of a cop car. Paramedics came to check us all out. My mom had to be taken to the ER for extremely high blood pressure and suffering from chest pains. My kids and I were taken as well. The moment that they realized that we were safe, the hysterical crying and clinging to me started. I was shaking and I felt cold despite the warm temperatures. I was told that I was in shock. After we all came home, except for my mom, who had to stay the night, the kids were too terrified to sleep in their beds and wanted to sleep with me. But we were all too wired to sleep, so I made some sleepy time tea and gave them some melatonin. I, on the other hand, didn't take anything, and the comforting noises my home usually makes became scary. A few days later, I got a call from one of the arresting officers, who told me that the man had several arrest warrants on him for similar things. He also told me that the guy had every intention of killing me and everyone else in my car, simply because he was angry and wanted to release it. So it was a good thing that I called 911 and went to the police station. It would take me a few weeks before I could fall asleep easily again. I had to put my kids into counseling, and I still have nightmares from it, but it's really rare now. I'm an 18-year-old female. This event happened when I was 16. Our home had to have some renovations, so the builders tell us that the renovations will only take a month, and we're able to live in an Airbnb that is thankfully in the same neighborhood as us. I take the bus to and from school, and it's a very long walk from the bus stop to the new location. One thing about me is that I have a very poor sense of direction. Even if I have been taking the same road for years, it's still a possibility that I might forget my way. So I was lost walking home one day, and accidentally found another route on the way to the Airbnb from the bus stop, which added another 10 to 20 minutes to my walk. This is important context to the story. So one day I'm walking home from the bus stop and I'm cursing myself out because it is minus 20 something and I've accidentally taken the longer route, which is when I noticed a middle-aged man a good distance behind me. At first I shrugged it off because he wasn't very close to me at all, but I began to get concerned because the route I'm taking is not the regular one. It's one where you have to cut in between houses and it seems too large of a coincidence. He is constantly behind me, even on the absurd route I'm taking. At this point I'm scared, but I don't want to alert him because it's winter and it's already getting dark out, and I'm not strong at all, so my chances of overpowering a grown man are slim to none. I pick up my pace, increasing the already pretty large distance between us, so as soon as I round the corner, there's a fence surrounding the Airbnb, and there's a gate that breaks up the fence. and leads to the neighborhood and where the house is. This is technically the way back, and you're not supposed to cross the gate. He has not rounded the corner yet. He is far behind me, so at this point I sprint like my life depended on it, down the sidewalk, and duck under the gate and hide behind the fence. I then climb the porch stairs and peek across the fence. It's a position where I can see the road and sidewalk, but you can't see me from the sidewalk or road. He bursts from around the fence, running, probably because the distance between us had grown too large, and stops in his tracks when he does not see me. He pulls out his phone and starts talking, then goes back the way he came from. Until this day, I'm not sure if it was paranoia, or if he generally had bad intentions, but I'm still glad that there was such a distance between us, which is the only way I was able to run off unnoticed by him. So, someone was following me home yesterday, and now I don't want to leave the house. I'm a 15-year-old female. I was walking home from the store yesterday, and I saw a black box car drive past me extremely slow, and the man in the car was clearly watching me. When he did finally pass me, I saw him watching me in his rearview mirror. I thought it was weird and slowed down my pace so that I could tell if he was waiting for me, or just a slow driver. He was still driving extremely slow, but moved a little bit when he saw two guys riding past on bikes. He then moved to the edge of the short street where he waited there. I was still towards the beginning of the street, so I acted like I forgot something and turned around to get out of sight. I waited and kind of peeked out to see if he had left, and when I saw that he was gone, I continued walking. I didn't think it would happen, but I made a mental note that if I saw a car behind me, it meant that he circled back around. After I continued walking, I made 3 turns, and was 3 turns away from my house. When I was walking up the little hill and almost on the 4th turn, I looked back and saw the man in the corner that I had just turned from, letting me know that he circled back around to find me. He sat there watching me continue walking until I got up the hill and turned another corner. Then, as I had barely made the last turn and was very close to my house, I saw the man's car turn the corner up the street straight across from where I was walking, waiting there. I pulled out my phone to call my mom and walked the other way, and he soon left after I pulled out my phone. My mom came out and walked me back to the house, and I didn't see the car for the rest of the day. But I keep thinking, he knows what neighborhood I stay in. What if he comes back? What if the next time he comes back, I'm out by myself again? What if no one's home to call? What if he sees me leaving and comes back when I'm the only one home? I'm so scared that he's going to come back that I don't want to go outside. I don't want to show him where I live, especially because I'm home alone very often. I have summer school and I have to go, but I don't want to leave the house in fear that he might be watching, waiting for me. I'm constantly looking out the windows to see if I spot him, especially since if he was at the store I was at, he definitely stays somewhere near the neighborhood. I got inspired to write this after reading someone else's story about zigzag walking. This happened over 10 years ago. I used to go out drinking with my friends on Fridays and Saturdays at goth bars. I think that was the year that a goth chick had been assaulted and left for dead and was identified thanks to her tattoos. As a result, we were all on extra high alert. When the bars closed, I would never be alone. Sometimes I waited with a friend at the local 24/7 coffee shop until we sobered up and the subway system would start working again at 5 a.m. This time though, my friend Claire, who was also my safety company, really wanted to hang out with another acquaintance of ours, Rick. So I said fine, let's go to Rick's instead of the coffee shop and head out to the subway later. Well, the time was fast approaching and she showed no signs of wanting to leave. She clearly wanted to sleep with him and probably stay. When 5 came, I was tired of feeling awkward and decided I would just leave on my own. Where's the metro station? At the time, we had basic flip phones, not really smart, no active GPS maps to refer to. He gave me the general direction of where to find the station, and I set out. As I walk through the empty, cold Montreal streets in quest to find the stations, I hear footsteps. Crap, what now? I continue to tell myself, it's probably just another individual headed to the station, right? I dare not look behind me completely. Don't walk faster. Keep a steady pace. If he senses fear and he is praying, it will excite him. I continue this for a while with no real idea of how long this cat and mouse game is going to go on because I didn't know the area or where the station really was. I decided to see if he was indeed trying to mess with me, so I zigzagged, crossed to the one side of the street, here and there, and listened to see if he followed my pattern. He did, every time. I couldn't tell if this guy wanted to attack me, troll me, or was just playing some sick game to establish dominance. So I kept at it, scared but also not about to give him the satisfaction by panicking. I finally see the station. A teeny bit before the station, the wind blew my scarf a bit ahead of me. Oh shit, not now. I sweat, picked it up, not stopping, hoping he wouldn't take this moment to do something. Finally, I had reached the zone with the other people and considered myself safe. I saw people on both platforms, but will never truly know who it was. Follower in the cold winter streets of Montreal. Let's not meet again. I'm a female and this happened around 2004 when I was 14. I live in England. So at this time, I was in my goth phase of life. I used to hang out in the weekend in the city center where all the goth, emo, alt kids used to hang. I had to get a bus to my home to and from the city center. It was a Saturday and I can't remember if it was almost winter or if I had just stayed out a little later than usual. But it was dark when I was on the bus going home. As I sat on the bus, I realized I needed to grab something from the local corner shop before I went home, so I decided to get off the bus at the stop before I usually get off at, as it's closer to the shop. The shop was about a 7-minute walk from my house. Just to explain a bit about the area, the place where my house was at was a nice, quiet, middle-class housing estate. But walk just a few minutes down the road and you'd be in a rougher area. The shop was in the rougher area. So I got off the bus and crossed the road to walk to the shop. I always felt a bit self-conscious when I was in the rougher area and when I was dressed in all my goth clothes, makeup, etc. Because the rougher area was kind of where all the generally lower class people who dressed act certain ways. Being a goth was like a walking target to be made fun of from these people. As I walked towards the shop, I got a feeling of dread and became aware of a guy that was stood against the wall outside the shop. He was staring at me. I felt uneasy, but just thought this guy was gonna shout an insult at me or whatever, but he didn't. I went to the shop, bought what I needed, and left. I started walking up the road towards where I lived and came aware that someone was walking behind me. I looked back and it was the guy that was stood outside the shop staring at me. I decided to cross onto the other side of the road where there was no other houses, only a school, so I could try to figure out if this guy was following me or if he was just generally going in the same direction as me. The guy crossed the road too. I walked a bit further and decided to cross back onto the other side of the road that I was originally on. And surprise, surprise, the guy crossed the road again behind me. By this point, I was certain that this guy was following me, so I picked up my pace a little and crossed back over, and as I needed to be on the other side of the road to get to my housing estate, the guy still followed and crossed behind me. As we were on the verge of my housing estate, I honestly don't know why I did it, but I decided to turn around and confront him. I asked him if he was following me. He denied it. I said I noticed him outside of the shop and mentioned how he crossed behind me every time I crossed the road. He was still denying following me. He was intoxicated with either drink or drugs, or both. Now that I'd seen him up close, he clearly was a lot older than me, probably in his 30s. He then started to ask me to go to a friend's party with him. I asked him where the party was, and it was back in the rougher area, even further than that shop I walked from. I told him no, and told him my age, so he was aware that I was a child. And after I told him I was 14, he was still asking me to come to the party with him. I reaffirmed to him that I was not going to go to the party, and that I was just trying to get home. I wasn't being confrontational, as I was scared of angering him. If anything, I was being quite nice and polite, considering he was an absolute creep. I then said something like, "I just want to go home without you following me." And he told me to walk, and that he wasn't going to follow me. I started walking. I took a few steps, and he had once again started walking towards me, following me. This is where I ran for my life, and he started to run after me. The problem I had now is that my house is pretty much a straight line from where we were, so if I went to my house, he would see where I lived. So I ran straight past my house around the corner, out of sight, and went to a neighbor, family, friend's house. Their door wasn't visible from the street, so fortunately, I lost him. Fortunately, my neighbor answered the door and let me in, and I phoned my mom and the police. My mom came to the neighbor's house as soon as she was called, and the police came out, and I don't know if they ever caught the guy, as I never heard anything back. I don't know what would have happened to me if he had caught up to me, or if I had been stupid enough to go to the party with him, but honestly, I dread to think. Needless to say, I never got off the bus at that bus stop again. It's been quite a few years since this happened, so my memory is fuzzy, but I figured I would try to piece the stuff together. This was around summertime of 2018 or so I must have been freshly 14. My grandma had given me a couple quarters and told me to go to the community laundry room to get a Dr. Pepper from the vending machine. She offered enough for me to get one as well, and it was still light enough so I think I could walk down the sidewalk and get back before the sunset if I was quick enough. Getting into the laundry room and getting a soda was easy enough, but as soon as I exited the building, a car idling in the middle of the street caught my eye. It hadn't been there when I had gone in. I was already put off by this, as I had stranger danger drilled into my head for as long as I could remember. The car had its windows rolled down, and the driver was a young woman with two older, I want to say mid-30s men in the back seat. They were looking straight at me and beckoning me closer. I immediately thought, "Fuck no," to myself and quickly broke eye contact and made my way quickly back down the street. As if the car knew the complex, they drove alongside me and pulled into the parking spot next to my grandmother's car. They start laughing with each other, still looking at me and whispering about something. At this point, I was terrified out of my little 14-year-old mind. I walked quickly inside my grandmother's apartment, locked and bolted the doors, and couldn't sleep for the rest of my visit. Nothing came of it, but I thank my lucky stars every day that I avoided anything more than an unsettling encounter. So weirdos from my grandmother's old apartment complex. Let's not meet. This happened when I was 16. I'm a female. I was at an outdoor festival close to home and decided to go there by bike. The festival finished, I grabbed my bike and noticed that I had a flat tire. It was raining super hard and it was 11:30 p.m., so the skies were black already. I was about to walk home and a friend said that he would walk with me. I said, "Nah, you still got a long travel ahead of you. I'll be fine on my own." He lived out of town. He insisted on going with me anyways because he wanted to make sure I got home safe. So we started walking. About 10 minutes into the walk, on an abandoned road, a car drove by with 3 or 4 guys, I think 25 to 30 years old, and slowed down, yelling how sexy I looked, and some more inappropriate things, and if I wanted to get into the car. We kept on walking, not responding at all. One guy in the car whispers to the rest, "Alright, let's go. This girl isn't alone." And they drove away. No clue what would have happened if I was alone, but I was happy that my friend was with me that night. My heart was racing. I'm currently 28 and I still remember, and have not told many people about this to be honest. Guys in the car, let's not meet. I just read another story on here about someone having an encounter and their dog possibly saving their life, and it reminded me of my own story with my pup. I rescued a pit bull from a neglected family. She was skin and bones when she came home and extremely submissive. After a week of love, affection, and food, she was the most amazing dog I have ever met. The softest, cuddliest baby who wouldn't even play fight with me unless she was under the blanket and did not know it was me. So I needed a quick late night run to my local shop. There's a 40-minute round trip on the main road with houses, or a 15-minute round trip through an alleyway that wraps around the back of the school fields. The alleyway has no street lamps, but I've never heard of anything bad happening, so I didn't think anything of it. So I set out with my dog in tow. Just before I reached the entrance, she stood still as a rock. I gently tried to usher her to follow me, but she refused. When I took my headphones off, I realized that she was softly growling and that I could hear a group of male voices coming from the alley. They soon came close enough where I could see them, and I think there was about 5 or 6 of them. This was during COVID, so they were all wearing masks with their hoods up. This is my mom's advice, but I don't know if it's the best thing to do. My mom always told me that if I found myself in a situation like this, to not act scared. Being scared shows that you're an easy target. With that in mind, I tugged firmly on my dog's lead to get her to follow me. She stuck to my side, literally pressing her body against my leg as I walked. Yes, it was awkward. And yes, I had to try very hard to walk normally. She was quietly growling the whole time. The men had stopped where they're standing slightly off the path to the side at this point. They were talking quietly amongst themselves as we walked by. I couldn't really hear much as my heartbeat was pounding in my ears and my gut was screaming at me. Once I knew I was at the point where the darkness of the alley made me essentially invisible, I heard one of them raise their voice slightly and say, "Nah, that's a pit," in a way that sounded like he was disagreeing. Now, they could have been the breed of my dog. That is a likely scenario. But my gut feeling I had while I was walking past and for the duration of my walk through the alley makes me believe otherwise. I think those men were discussing possibly robbing me, or worse, and my soft baby who was literally scared of her own reflection deterred them due to being an aggressive breed. It's safe to say that we walked the long way home now. So creepy group of men, let's not meet again. This happened years ago when I lived in eastern Pennsylvania. I am a petite girl, and at the time, I was in my mid-20s, but looked much younger, so I might have made more of a target. I was driving home from work in the evening when I realized a truck had driven past earlier. A large pickup with a Confederate flag across the front was making the same turns as me through residential areas, and then started to tailgate me as well. The people inside were a middle-aged man who was driving and a little boy in the passenger seat. The guy made a point to follow me through several neighborhoods, and even though multiple last-minute turns I made to check if it wasn't just a coincidence and ran stop signs, as we drove I started to feel more and more panicked. I knew I couldn't just drive to my house, but I was so freaked out that I didn't even think about going to the police at the time. This went on for about 20 minutes, but it felt way longer. I eventually got to a shopping center parking lot with a lot of pedestrian traffic and pulled in. As soon as I drove into the area with a bunch of people walking around and loading groceries, this guy peeled off through the parking lot past me and sped away, screeching his tires. I'm not sure if he thought it would be funny to scare a young girl as a game with his son, or if he actually had worse motives. I eventually left the area. There were a lot of missing person reports in the area, and plenty of encounters being reported of other people being followed around, followed in stores, or followed home. I got tired of living somewhere that you don't even feel safe to grab groceries alone. I was recently driving home from a campsite in southern Minnesota. I was driving on the back roads as I left a tiny town, maybe 500 people, and I noticed a silver SUV ahead of me. They were about a half mile in front of me. The SUV pulled over to the shoulder of the road, no flashers. I went around them, pulling into the other lane to be nice. As soon as I get by them, they pull right back onto the road right behind me. I go through another small town and a bigger town, 20,000 people, and I'm turning from a single lane to a double. Traffic law states to go to the closest lane. I went to the far one, and they stayed right behind me. I am nervous at this point that they have been following me for about 30 to 40 minutes. I keep telling myself it was just a coincidence. I knew my next turn did not have a turn lane. I decided to make the corner without signaling. I had signaled every other turn I had made, and so had the SUV. I was keeping my eye on him, but no signal. He just followed me around the corner. I had not slowed down to give him a clue that I was turning either. The SUV followed me for another 30 minutes. I finally lost him when I barely made it through a railroad crossing before the train. He was stuck on the other side of the train from me. I made the last 30 minutes of my drive with no signs of the silver SUV. This happened about 10 years ago when I was around 18 years old. I had met up with some friends after work and was making my way home around 11 p.m. I wasn't far from my house when I realized I walked past a man that was going the other way. I noticed that he stopped and looked at me before turning around to follow me in the opposite direction of where he had been going. I thought it was weird, but I was, and am, fairly oblivious sometimes and rather stupid, so I just keep walking home. At the time, my front door was in a badly lit alley, and it was as I turned down that I noticed this man was still following me. He was keeping his distance, but I saw him peeking around the corner of the street as I started walking down it. Now, I might be oblivious, but someone that's staring me from behind the corner after following me for a while was enough to set me off. I panicked and decided I wanted to get somewhere safe. I started walking quickly into this alleyway to get to my door as quick as possible. My brother was a fisherman at the time who often brought his work home, so we had a few large fishing weights, about 1 foot long and 1 inch thick, by our front door. Still in fight or flight mode, I picked up one of them and turned to face the front of the alleyway. When the man turned to enter the alleyway, I looked at him and shouted, "Excuse me, why the hell are you following me?" Looking back now, it probably wasn't the best move, but thankfully it worked. He turned around and left. The whole thing shook me up a little bit, so I went home and crashed from the adrenaline rush. Thankfully, I never saw this guy again, so this is now just a distant memory. I'm currently traveling the sea with my 2 brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my 2 brothers, one older, one younger, decided to sit on the beach and have a quick smoke. We are chatting away, sat at the beach when we noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near to where we were sitting. At first I wasn't concerned about it. However, my spider senses were alerted. Then a minute or two later I noticed another Vietnamese man dressed as a grab and delivery driver, acting suspiciously and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on their phone, and I believe they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, this alerted us heavily, and we decided to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. As we were walking, I noticed both Vietnamese men had gone on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. They then overtook us and sat on a bench further down the path, waiting for us to cross their path. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking in the muddy grass as the crow flies to the nearest exit, avoiding the 2 men who were still watching us and clearly had bad intentions. We had 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looks behind us and sees the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my younger brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked backwards towards the exit. Noticing the second assailant was also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear. helmet, and motorcycle gloves. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispering Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get the fuck out of there, but he was being a dumbass. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my brother's trust. Then out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning in very close trying to hear the whispering man, the guy grabbed my brother's crotch, grabbing his dong. He was shocked. I was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the dong grabber was super unexpected and a real curveball. After the dong grab, we started shouting and approaching the men in an aggressive manner, in fighting stances. This slowed down their approach enough to make a dash to the park exit. For context, both me and my younger brother are competing MMA fighters. I posted one of my fights on Reddit if you don't believe me. However, this whole situation was unexpected. We didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouted at them. We walked out of the exit into the busy city and walked around for a while, making sure that we were not being followed before heading back to the hotel. What's your take on the story? Be careful in parks at night in Vietnam? Or dong grabbers be peeking from behind trees? I was stalked for over 10 years. This happened in the late 90s. I'm a female 43, and my friend, Rose, female 42, met him together. My stalker was a guy that Rose and I met on the bus one day, coming home from volunteer work after school as a candy striper at the local hospital. We were on the bus going home, laughing and talking, and this guy just randomly sits up by us and starts talking. He tells us his name, and we laugh, thinking that he said his name was Gay. Yeah, stupid teenage girls. He corrected us and said his name was Jay. We talked a bit more, and innocently gave him our names. He was like 7 years older and kind of strange the more we talked to him, and he asked for my number, but I said no. He got annoyed, but whatever, right? So we thought that was that. A few days later, maybe a week later, me and my same friend ran into Jay while switching buses downtown. I was going to her house like I did a few times a week when we ran into him. He asked me to hang out and watch him play hockey that night. I said no, that I was going to my friend's. He got weirdly annoyed and kept trying to beg me, telling me how much fun it would be and trying to get me away from my friend. He really didn't want her to come to the hockey game either, just wanted it to be us. So weird. Our bus finally came and we got out of there so fast. Over the next few weeks I kept running into him downtown. It was like he knew my schedule. Every time I tried to be nice and get away as fast as I could, and every time he would get annoyed because I didn't want to hang out. A few weeks passed and I'm in school, and in walks Jay. I was so mad and frustrated and snapped on him. Why was he here? And how did he know what school I went to? Did he follow me on the city bus? He tried saying that he was here to see his friends, but he wasn't with anyone. Just a guy around 25 years old, wandering around a high school. After that, I randomly saw him on my bus, and he would always sit across from me and watch. He would still ask for us to hang out, and I would still say no. As time went on, he would still find me on the bus and sit across from me with who I guess was his girlfriend, or a girl he was trying to make me jealous with. He would look at me while he would make out with her. He would do everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. I would either turn up my music or do my best to ignore him or move to another spot. Nothing ever seemed to deter him. He never did anything bad enough to call the police, but he knew what was wrong. And even knew that I had panic attacks, and I'm sure he got off to that. As the years went on, I would see less and less of him. He'd randomly pop up and make me uncomfortable. He started standing real close to me and trying to talk. I would have a panic attack and do my best to ignore him. I would still walk away, and he would get more and more pushy. Every time I would run into him, I'd text my friend that was there the first time we ran into him, and get her to try to calm me down. It's now 2023, so about 24 years since it all started, and I haven't seen him in the last 8 years, and praying that I'll never see him again. I'm 43, so he must be around 50, but I'm so scared to run into him. I have thought I saw him a few times and panicked, but it wasn't him. I really hope I never see him again. This happened a long time ago, about 10 years or so, but I never forgot about it and it still gives me the chills. I'm a 33-year-old female and was in my early 20s. At the time, I had a female dog named Nina, a boxer. She passed away when she was 8 from lung cancer. I miss her a lot. Nina was very energetic, so I took her on long walks around the neighborhood, usually at the end of the day, around 4 to 6 p.m., when it wasn't too hot, but not dark either. One thing you must know about Nina is she loved people. She did not get along with any other dogs, but every time she saw someone walking up to us, she would shake her tail and want to get closer and ask for pets. One day, we went on our walk as usual. Everything was fine for the most of it. I saw a few dog tutors walking their dogs, an old couple sitting in front of their house chatting, and then when we were alone, Nina suddenly started growling. One thing I didn't mention before, I am a graduate in biology and specialized in animal behavior. At the time of the story, I was finishing college, so I used to pay a lot of attention to my dog's behavior. I had quite a lot of knowledge on dog behavior because it was my favorite subject in the area. Dogs can see movement much better than us, like the eyebrows raise or a little tension on the shoulders they can pick up easily. So of course, a dog growling doesn't sound that weird. Nina did growl at other dogs and cats once she saw them, but this was different. It was very low and all the fur on her back was up. Her tired behavior was of alarm, and then I noticed she was looking back while growling. So I looked back behind me. In the distance, a block away, I saw a man. This made me even more alert, because Nina had never growled at anyone on the street before. She never stopped walking by my side or tried to pull away, but she kept this low growl and kept staring at this man. I started to freak out and turned to the next block. She stopped for a second, but when we reached the next corner, she started growling again, and there he was again. He didn't try to talk. His expression was serious, kind of emotionless. I kept walking in random patterns, and he was always there. That man was definitely following me. At some point, our distance started to shrink. Nina's growling was getting stronger. So when I turned the next corner, I started to run while I wasn't in his line of sight. I ran down about 4 blocks in the direction of an area I knew had more traffic and people around. I stopped to catch my breath and looked behind me. He was far away in the right corner from where I started running. Just there, standing and looking at me. Nina was looking at him, still with her alarmed posture. After about a minute, he turned around and went away in the same direction. In that moment, Nina finally relaxed. I paid attention to Nina's behavior the entire way back to the house, but she was just her normal happy self. I told this story to my parents and a few neighbors, and no one seemed to know of any guy that looked like that. I never saw him again, and Nina never behaved like that again either. So I'll never know who he was and why he was following me, but I definitely did not regret trusting Nina's instincts. So people, please pay attention to your pet's behavior as much as you can. It's not about a supernatural sixth sense. They can actually feel, see, and hear better than us, and there's no behavior that happens for no reason. There is always a reason. Stay safe, everyone. So this story happened when I was a kid. My parents were divorced, and my older sister had a baby that she would always pawn off on me. My dad and stepmom showed up at our house when my mother was at work. They had decided to take us to the fair. That would have been great, but I had my 1-year-old niece with me that I was babysitting. I told my dad it was not a good idea because I was babysitting. He insisted, and basically I was forced and had to take my niece. Once we got to the fair, my dad and stepmom gave my sister, my stepbrother, and me $20 and told us to have fun. I should mention here I was 12 years old, and they still expected me to watch my niece. There's not much you can do at the fair with a baby in tow, so I went to one of the snack trucks and bought ice cream for the both of us. That was when I first noticed the man. He was heavy set, probably in his 40s, and he was staring at us. There's something about the way he was staring that freaked me out. I'm not sure if it was me or my niece that he was interested in, but either way, I was freaked out. I told myself I was overreacting and got up and walked off carrying my niece. He followed. I walked all around the fair looking for my dad and my stepmother, my stepbrother, my sister. I couldn't find any of them anywhere, and the whole time the man followed. I had to pee, but I didn't want to go into the bathroom. I was afraid of him following us in. I ditched my niece's stroller. I just wanted her in my arms, and the stroller was slowing us down. So this has been going on for about 3 hours, and it was getting dark outside. I was terrified and scared for my niece and myself. I kept trying to lose the guy, turning down different paths, but he kept following. Finally, I saw a man in a security outfit. I ran up to him, full on crying now. I told him I couldn't find my family, and a strange man had been following us. When I went to point the man out, he was gone. The security guard took us to the tent. I think it was a first aid tent. They kept telling me that they could watch my niece and for me to relax. I was very shaken. I refused to let her out of my sight. They had me call my mother, who screamed at me for going while I was supposed to be babysitting. She told me that I was grounded and irresponsible. Finally, my dad and stepmother were found and brought to get us. They were also mad at me for calling my mother. They took us home, and when I got there, I told my mother about the man. I wasn't grounded anymore, but her and my father went to war over visitations. Just a couple years before, 2 girls had gone missing at the fair and were never found. My mother was beyond pissed that they made us go and then ditched us. My father, until the day he died, had an attitude with me about this event and said I overreacted. To this day, I hate fairs. Hi. Thought I'd share my experience in case anyone's been through something similar or has an idea of what kind of scenario I was dealing with. I was driving home from the gym at night and pulled up to a red light near a local courthouse. I noticed the driver of a white Jeep 1 lane over staring at me. Older guy, I'd guess in his late 40s to 50s, with long sideburns. I'm a 31-year-old male. I turned and looked at him, and he started pointing towards me, towards my left. At first, I thought he wanted to cut in front of me when the light turned green, which is strange because there's no one coming behind us, so he could have just waited for me to go. But I guess someone else might pull up. I pointed to my left to confirm that that's what he wanted, and then I opened my window a tiny bit because he kept pointing, so I wanted to ask what was up. He didn't open his. The light turned green and he changed lanes and drove behind me. It feels likely that he was trying to tell me to pull over earlier. I kept driving and changed lanes because he was tailgating me. He followed me immediately. Eventually he switched lanes, but was driving erratically. Kept putting his left turn signal on, but not turning left for several lights, for example. He slowed down to maintain the same pace as me a few times. Eventually I turned before my actual home route to throw him off. He kept going, but I just looped around and actually headed home. I saw him waiting at a light to turn left towards my house, so I kept driving. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but that was strange and unnerving to say the least. This literally just happened to me, so I'll try not to ramble too much. I work an evening shift, so I get home about 10 p.m. most nights. Tonight, about 2.5 blocks from my house, I'm stopped at a stop sign behind a big red truck who's turning left. It's late, we're on a 2-lane, 20-mile-per-hour limit residential street, So when it takes a truck a long minute to turn, with no cross traffic, I'm wondering, what the heck? But I don't really care. I'm not a fast driver or in a real hurry on the road. He creeps through his turn really, really slow. Now I'm more alert, and he's out of the way enough. I see he's going slow to watch the car in front. The little black car parked on the road, not on the curb. Passenger door is open, and a guy is standing there yelling at someone, but I couldn't see who. The car was on, but the lights were off, so I assume they aren't driving, and go around in a wide arc, slower than normal, but nowhere near as slow as the truck that turned. Half a block later, I see headlights behind me. They don't speed up on me or give me any indication that anything is wrong. They stay about a half a block behind me. I've got no more stop signs and a straight shot home, so I'm not even thinking about the car behind me. I turn the car off, open my door crack, and shuffle around for my phone, bag, etc. They fucking stopped in front of my driveway. I slam and lock my door fast, and then their passenger door opens and some guy gets out. At this point, I'm debating whether to call my husband who is inside, but probably asleep, or the police, and settle on the police when their interior light turns on and I see two, both looking my way. The one who got out says loud enough for me to hear, "It's right here, man. That door just shut. I'm telling you, right here." He sounds drunk, and I've got 911 dialed and ready for as soon as he takes a single step closer. But instead, he gets back into the car. They sit there for a minute longer with the interior lights on, and I swear we locked eyes. I'm shaking. I can't figure out if I'm going to start crying or yell at them. They zoom off way faster than they pulled up. I sit in the car for a whole 6 minutes, waiting to see which way they'd go, and to be sure they left, which they drive off all the way straight out, but back towards the way they came. Then I went in and cried when I realized they stopped a few feet short of where our security cam would have captured their faces. This area is known for petty crime, vandalism, and bike thievery, not violence towards strangers. I don't want to drive anymore. I don't want to know what they wanted, but I do want some pepper spray on my keychain now. My skin still crawls thinking about this guy. He saw me shopping for school supplies and things for my new apartment one evening during the first week of grad school and decided I was his mark. I just moved to my new college town. Didn't even have a cell phone yet after leaving the one my folks paid for during undergrad behind. I was grown and could take care of myself. What a nimwit I was. As I left the parking lot with my purchases, I noticed a truck pulled behind me at the exit. It was late and there weren't many people out. I pulled out and so did he. It was a few miles down a long retail street with lots of stoplights before my turn. As I drove, I realized this guy in the truck was trying to get my attention. I was in a relationship, so I ignored him. Over the next few miles, he kept trying to get me to look at him. Some red lights, he would end up ahead of me, some behind or beside. At every light, he would position himself so he could stare at me, either directly or in his mirrors. His gaze was unwavering, and my anxiety rose. He was driving oddly, speeding up close to my bumper, hitting his brakes when he was in front of me, swerving close to my car a couple times. Finally, at a red light when he was beside me, I glanced over and absolutely started to panic when I first met an unbelievably empty, unwavering stare and realized that he was fiddling with himself. He was getting off at the fact that I was terrified. He was following me and trying to force me to pull over. At one point, I scooted through the intersection at a yellow, and a couple of cars were ahead of him, thinking I could shake him. Nope, he went around those cars at the red light and ran it and got back in front of me. A freeway entrance ramp came up, and I tried to fake him out by putting on my signal and getting into the merge lane for it. He took the bait and started up the ramp. I quickly got out of the merge lane and continued straight. Again, I hope I would lose him, but he drove his truck back up the embankment and kept following. At another light, when he was beside me, I pulled through the light and turned at the last possible second. He made a U-turn and ran another red to follow me. My panic really ramped up at this point. With no cell phone, no sense of direction, in a new city, I really didn't know what to do. So I turned on the classic rock and forced myself to sing along and forced myself to go the speed limit so I wouldn't crash out of terrified stupidity. I decided to drive all the way to the supermarket across town because I remembered it had a police station in it. He followed me all the way there. He burned out of it as soon as he saw the cop cruisers parked in front. I filed a police report and asked the police to escort me home. I insisted because something told me that this creep was waiting for me to leave the police station. He was. As soon as I pulled out, I saw him. I pulled over and told the officer following me, and he went after him, but the truck had taken off and the cops couldn't catch him. The police got surveillance video from the first store. It turned out this jerk had been dogging me the entire time I was shopping. I saw him on the security footage following me through the store, and saw him following me out, close enough to grab my elbow. I saw the footage of him circling the lot in the truck waiting for me to pull out when I took too long to unload my cart. My heart just sank. I was able to remember 6 of the 7 digits from his license plate and the make and model of his truck. In the end, the cops did nothing. They said it was a he said, she said. The surveillance video didn't catch him doing anything particularly unlawful, and it was a losing effort to try to charge him with anything. I ended up trading vehicles with my friend for a couple months to feel safer and went on with my life. I had no idea what this disgusting piece of shit did just a handful of months later, until almost 15 years had passed. I was watching a Discovery ID show about a kidnapping and murder of Sandy Jeffers. I almost fell out of my seat when I saw the mugshot of her killer, Aaron Lee Skeen. It was him. I was so disgusted that the law enforcement did nothing in my case that I tracked down the investigator in the murder case, and after verifying some of the things about the vehicle that was changed in the TV reenactment to weed out people making up crap, she took my contact info and social statement. She can neither confirm nor deny that my run-in was with Skeen, but ended her statement by saying, "At least you don't have to worry about him anymore, because he's got life without parole." I only wish that something could have been done when he terrorized me. Perhaps things would have ended different for Sandy. So, creepy murder stalker crazy dude, let's never ever meet again. When I was in high school, I had a strange encounter riding my bike home from work. When I was a senior in high school, I worked at a Target store from about 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. 4 to 5 nights a week. After helping close the store, see out the registers, and other final closing tasks, my coworker and I were usually at the building on our way home before 10:30. The store was not too far from the bike path that went close to my home. It took me about 15 to 20 minutes to ride my bike home from work down that path in a large subdivision. At about the midway point home, there was a section of the bike trail that went through an undeveloped field that was poorly lit. I remember I was slowing down, changing the radio station on my CD Walkman. Yes, I'm dating myself here. When suddenly I see a dark figure about 100 feet away from me, starting to run at me from a dark field. Fight or flight instantly kicked in, and I started riding my 10-speed mountain bike as fast as I could. I felt like I was qualified for the Tour de France. As I was escaping, I took a quick peek back and saw the guy in black attempting to chase after me for a few moments. Needless to say, what was normally a 15 to 20 minute bike ride turned into a 5-minute top speed and top gear bike ride home. I obviously didn't sleep well that night, but still occasionally think about that encounter in my darker moments. I had a guy follow me home. I was out getting coffee, and I'm walking home, and there's this dude on the sidewalk checking me out. Whatever, that's fine. It happens. But then I see him again. Like this man got in his car and drove ahead of me. Like I didn't see him get out of his car the second time. I just saw him standing there. Then I'm walking to my apartment building, about to buzz myself in. There he is, right behind me, running in. He got close to me. Mind you, it's fucking daylight. Then after he finally leaves, I go into my building and let the Uber Eats guy in, who was there the whole time. Then he starts hitting on me. Like it's fine to get compliments, but I don't want them right after I got fucking followed into my building. He was also very persistent and wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm a 26-year-old female. I recently moved from the US to the Balkans for a summer legal internship. After a few days of getting settled into my home for the summer, I decided to sign up for a gym nearby my apartment to serve as a self-care ritual and blow off steam after tough work days. Coming home from my first workout at the new gym, endorphins on 100, I noticed at the crosswalk that a man across from the busy street where I stopped was staring at me. Now, this is not super uncommon, as I have found in my new home. I've gotten used to dealing with the occasional male stares, but they're usually very brief. This guy, however, was not looking away. I stared back for a full beat, so I knew that he knew I saw him, hoping that would be the end of it. And then I turned my head away and continued to walk down the street, trying to avoid the creepy feeling that this wasn't the end of the interaction. From what I could tell, he didn't cross the lengthy street to meet me, and probably just continued down from his side. Next thing I know, about 2 minutes later, I'm at the crosswalk, about to cross, when I see him in my peripheral, next to me, at the stop. How he crossed the street and sped up to meet me so quickly is either a reflection of his cunning and athletic prowess or my general lack of observation skills. Standing next to me now, he is still staring at me, but I try not to tip him off that I'm noticing this. I take off as fast as I can when it's safe to cross the crosswalk, and naturally, he matches my pace, a step or so behind me, still staring. Here I find myself in a familiar situation that I imagine many who have been followed also find themselves. It is a critical juncture, if you will, where you ask, is this someone following me, or a silly misunderstanding? I begin to ask myself, am I overreacting? I've been followed many times before, sadly, and I've found the best way to handle it is, try to cut the baby in half, so to speak. I give them the benefit of the doubt to prove to me that they aren't doing what I fear they're doing, while also trying to avoid any situation that would escalate the danger or cue them off to where I'm going. Trust, but verify. So I decide to zip quickly towards another street, not my own, in hopes that he would prove me wrong and not continue to follow me. This was a busy intersection, and there are about 6 different streets to follow from the crosswalk. He follows me down the random street I chose, where there was truly only one residential building, no stores or restaurants he could have been headed towards, to explain him choosing the street unless he lived nearby. I do something I've done before when followed to test the other person. I slow down and speed up my pace randomly to see if they match mine, or like a normal person heading somewhere, try to walk by me, as there is plenty of room on the street to do so. Within a block or so, I realize that he's definitely following. Definitely still staring, but not only that, with every few steps, I feel his presence, keeping pace, was also subtly getting closer and closer to me. The sun was setting at this point, and we were walking towards the part of town I don't know as well. I decided to make a break for it. I slowed down, as slow as I've gone throughout the entire pursuit, checked my peripheral, and jetted myself across the street until I get to the other side. I look back once I'm there to see that he is now looking across the street and moving towards it to follow me more. But this time, I gave him the miniest glare I could muster and reached to my bag as to suggest that I was reaching for pepper spray or something. He notices my gesture, makes eye contact, stops, and then literally turns his head away to feign looking at numbers on the street, like he was lost or looking for a specific spot. As if he hadn't been slowing up and speeding down with me for the past 10 minutes, not looking anywhere but my backside. He continued to pretend to look around, glance back at me, look around some more, glance back at me, and when he looks away the third time, I decide now it's truly time to make a break for it. I began booking it down the opposite street while occasionally peering back to see if he kept following. I take a bunch of well-lit, busy streets, employing random unnecessary turns, as I have when I've been followed before. Eventually, once I checked the whole street, I feel confident I had lost him. I finally calculate my way back home. The next day, I asked my friend from work, who is local, to take me to get some pepper spray. I bought the mini version, the smallest size, that can fit easily in my purse. Some background. I'm a 28-year-old female. I'm a dog walker, pet sitter. Some of the dogs I walk are very reactive, as the one dog, a pit bull lab mix. She used to be a bad puller, along with being incredibly reactive to other dogs on leashes as soon as she would see them. Through lots of work and training with her, she has come a long way with her reactivity to the point it's really not an issue anymore. Even when the owner's carelessness allows a dog to get too close for comfort. On this one walk, she was a dream the whole time, past multiple dogs without issue. She would just look at me for a treat that she knew she would get if she was good. When we turned down the street that looked completely vacant at the time, so I could give her some more relaxed walking time. All went well for a while, not a soul in sight, until there was. While I'm usually very good at keeping my head on a swivel, as some of my walks are not in the safest areas of the city, this guy took me by surprise. I don't know how he did it, but he got about 2 or 3 feet behind us without the dog or me knowing he was there. All of a sudden he shouted something unintelligibly. I could only make out the last 2 words, "Your dog." Immediately, my dog, with no prior history of human reactivity, got between us and started growling, snapping, and lunging aggressively at the man. I'm a smaller woman at 5'3", and I guess this guy was around 6'7" at the very least, and incredibly muscular. As soon as he saw my dog trying to attack him, and me struggling to hold her back, he threw up his arms and bolted across the street without another word. Disappeared shortly after around the corner. I've never praised a dog for reactivity until that moment. Gave her all the treats I had left in my pocket, took her home, and told her owner what just happened and how her dog might have saved my life. Of course, I hope I'm wrong, and this guy was just slow on social cues, but neither the dog nor I got that impression. Needless to say, she's by far my favorite client's dog. I go on walks with her still every week, but I haven't gone down that street again while there are no people out. I'm beyond blessed to have her and get to walk her weekly, but I hope I never meet your dog guy again. This happened around the summer of 2022, after I met with 2 performer friends to rehearse for the upcoming show. I was catching the night bus to get back to the subway station where my car was. As I took the train while it was still operating, I was already uneasy as I'm a femme presenting individual, but I had no money to get a taxi or Lyft at the time. The bus finally came around, so I got on and paid the $2 bus fare and sat down. The rest of the ride was pretty uneventful as everyone was keeping to themselves. Pretty soon, the bus began to empty out as people got off at their stations, where it was me and one man who was giving me some weird vibes. I caught him looking at me a few times out of nowhere during the bus ride, but now he was asleep. I prayed that he would not get off at the same stop as me, but unfortunately, that's exactly what happened once I finally got to my stop. When I began walking towards my car, I looked behind me to find that the man was following me. He was keeping a bit of a distance from me, but I was still paranoid that he was 100% following me. I began to pick up the pace, getting my keys out while also clutching onto my pocket knife my roommate gave me for protection. As soon as I reached my car, I jumped in and immediately locked the doors. The man at this point caught up to me and walked over to the passenger side of my car, but fortunately I had already locked it, so he couldn't get in. Not even bothering to put my seatbelt on, I started my engine and drove off out of the parking lot quickly. Once I felt safe enough, I put my seatbelt on and flagged down a member of security for the transportation system. I saw that the man who stalked me was still at the station, so I pointed him out and explained what happened. The security officer looked a bit annoyed, but it wasn't annoyance at me. It was annoyance like, I can't believe this is happening again. He told me that he'll take it from here, and I thanked him before driving back to my apartment. A few days later, I bought pepper spray, and ever since that evening, I've never left my apartment without it. I keep it out and ready to be used. Unfortunately, I haven't had a repeat of being stalked to my car. It scares me to think though, what would have happened if I didn't lock my doors on time? What would the stranger have done to me? Would he have pulled out a weapon or tried to take advantage of me? I feel as if the story is not as bad as most of what I read on here, but I still feel the need to share it. In 2018, I moved to a bigger city in another country and got accustomed to the public transport pretty fast. The city is in Europe and actually known to be one of the safer places. At the time, I took the public bus to school every morning, around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. My younger brother's school was also on the same route. He got off a few stations ahead of me, but I would often take him to school and pick him up on my way back since he was only 8 years old at the time. I was 15. The routine went on for a year, and at some point, while taking the bus at the same time every morning, I knew the faces of the people I see almost every morning on the bus. I gradually started to notice this man stare at my brother and me. He was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. He was pretty short, skinny, with glasses and a bit of a beard. After some time, he would smile while looking at us, and I explained it to myself as him thinking that we were a cute pair of siblings or something. Despite that, his staring got more intense after a while and was not discreet at all. He started getting off at the same station as me, where my school was. Fortunately, there was a few different schools in the area, so he couldn't have known for sure which one was mine, right? I hope so, at least. One day I was late for class because my younger brother missed his station, so I returned him to school and barely managed to catch the next bus, running for it. I entered the bus, short of breath and happy I made it. I sat down by the window, right by the door. I looked to my side since I felt a stare, and there he was again, standing despite many empty seats, staring at me, trying to catch my breath. I turned my head to the front again, trying to pretend I didn't notice him. I got off one station before, in case the bus got stuck on the busy intersection ahead, and started walking to school through the shortcut. Because I was in a hurry, I didn't notice that he had gotten off behind me as well. He probably walked behind me for around 100 meters before realizing I didn't notice him, and decided to approach me. He creepily peeked through my right side, started walking pretty close next to me. He greeted me and I awkwardly stepped away while walking ahead at the same pace. He said, "We saw each other a few times on the bus, right?" I answered something along the lines of, "No, sorry, I don't know you." He then started asking me pretty creepy questions like, "You're in high school, aren't you? Where's your brother today? He wasn't with you. That's your brother, right?" I was flustered, so I just uttered a similar sentence again. "Sorry, I don't know you." He then made this ridiculous remark how he didn't know me either. "So you want to talk?" He continued following me very near my school, but after realizing it was also more crowded in that part of the city center, he gave up and made his way through one of the alleys, separating from me. I sighed out of relief and told a few classmates what happened. They were pretty angry at him, so they told me to call them to wait in front of the school in case it happens again. I stopped seeing him on the bus sometime after that, which made me think it wasn't his actual bus and that he was just there to stare at minors. After COVID calmed down, I started noticing him again, but I don't think he recognized me. I now wear glasses, I lost some weight and wear more makeup than before. Kinda turned into a metalhead, so my style changed as well. He even stood next to me a few times, but I am taller than him, so I'm not worthy of staring at anymore. He prefers minors and still stares at extremely young girls on the bus, especially if they wear shorts. I've gained some confidence to be the one catching him staring at thighs of girls and then staring him down in disgust. He often looks down after that. I wish I had some sort of evidence to report him, but he never actually touches anyone, thank God. I wish I could say let's not meet again, but I still see him on the bus. Except now I'm older and able to spot out a predator when I see one. When I was 15 and 16, I used to sneak over to my boyfriend's house that was just around the block. I wasn't allowed to date him cause crazy stepdad and all. Anyway, I leave my house to meet up with my friends. It's summertime in Chicago, about 5:30, still light out but the sun is starting to set. In my town, there's a bunch of kids that would meet at a convenience store that was kind of in the middle of our teeny town. My boyfriend and I lived all the way on the opposite side of this middle part of town. It's a super cute town. All the houses look the same, bungalows, trees line the nicely manicured lawns, and no matter where you are, you know someone that lives on a street or two away. While I was walking about 5 blocks away from my destination alone, I remember crossing the street and seeing 2 young guys across from the opposite side of the road. Not weird, but my Nana always taught me to be suspicious of anyone. So the guy is on the opposite side of the road, a little behind me. I'm aware of him and make sure he knows this as I look at him. This is something I learned growing up, and I just keep going on my way, not really concerned at this point. A block later, he crosses over and speeds up closer to me. I can't describe how or why, but this is when all my nerves were on high alert. He's close enough, I could see his face and the look in his eyes. Maybe this is when I should tell you that I'm not even 5 feet at this point in my life, and I was well under 100 pounds. I'm teeny. I grab my phone and pretend to call someone, yelling so they can hear me. I'm coming upstairs, right now, hurry. And I dart up some random person's stairs to their front door. When I look back, he's right at the bottom of the sidewalk, out of breath, and made a look like, "Fuck you," and walked away. I snuck behind some bushes and waited a bit to make sure he left and called my boyfriend. I ran the last few blocks to meet up with my friends. Maybe it was nothing, but my gut tells me different. I still remember the guy's face, and from time to time try to look up to see if someone matches his description in the news. One of my favorite places to go on walks is a city cemetery. It's quiet, shaded, and next to a mildly busy intersection should something out of the ordinary happen. Sometimes there are other walkers too that politely smile. Other times there are mourners to politely avoid. And there are wildlife like geese, squirrels, and the occasional owl. I was in the old part of the cemetery when this happened. It's smaller than the main cemetery, but more hilly for better cardio. A large white SUV with tinted windows pulls into the cemetery. No big deal. Probably not mourners as this portion is old. The most recent grave that I've seen was dated from 1960, with a vast majority coming from the 1800s, but maybe looking for a family grave for history's sake. I know where they are going as to not disturb them, but they don't stop. Again, not a problem. The plates were out of country, so I figured that they were looking for a plot. I adjust course to give them some space. As a history nerd, I think of how cool it is to see someone tracing their history. You hear it a lot about shivers up a spine, or hairs on the neck standing up, and that's what happened to me. The SUV was not stopping. Instead, they started to follow me. I adjusted my course again, and they did too. At one point, they were actually directly parallel to me, just a series of plots away. By now, I had shut my music off, but kept my earbuds in. I slowed my pace and made sure to acknowledge them. "Yes, I see you, creepy SUV. Keep your distance, and I'll keep mine." I noticed that the passenger rear window rolled down and a woman in the back seat. She quickly ducks down when she sees me staring at them. The driver and the front passenger still had their window up. This SUV has now slowed down even more, almost to a stop, and I pick up my pace and did a little half jog across the lawn. The voice in my head was telling me, stay calm, alert, but to get going. I pulled out my phone to call my husband to tell him what was going on, while I gripped my car keys in my fist as a makeshift weapon. The moment I did this, that SUV moved again. I made it to my car, and they had maneuvered themselves to face my vehicle, albeit almost a full way across the cemetery. When I left, they did too. Now, logically, they were probably looking for a plot. The lady in the back seat was no older than 25, so she probably got embarrassed when she realized how weird her family members looked, following me around like that. And who targets people in a cemetery? But what if and why follow me after I changed course? This happened to me when I was 16. I was going back home after a long day of high school and decided to use a shortcut since I was so exhausted. My dad had forbidden me from using that shortcut because I had to go through a park that was full of homeless men taking drugs. But I wanted to go home quickly and relax, so I used the shortcut anyway. I got past that park without nothing particular happening, but shortly after I noticed two men slowly driving a motorcycle and looking at me. They laughed for some reason. They drove by immediately after, so I didn't think much of it. But they came back, and again, they drove slowly near me and laughed while looking, and then drove by. I started to feel creeped out and hold my bag tight because I thought they were thieves. They were common in my city. They usually snatch a bag from you or your phone before you notice. I made the decision in my head to give them my bag if they wanted it and run. I only have 2 school manuals in there, and it's not worth my safety if they are armed. It happened a third time at this point, and I had enough. I started to walk faster, and I looked behind me every 2 seconds to see if they were there, and I saw them following me slowly. Finally, I lost them, but every time I heard the sound of a motorcycle behind me, I looked around nervously. My dad scolded me when I told him what happened, but was relieved that nothing bad happened to me. I never took that shortcut ever again. I can't stop myself from wondering, what did they want from me? I guess I'll never get an answer. I live in Melbourne, Australia, western suburbs, in the bad part of town. I don't have a car, so I rely on public transportation. I went to go see a friend who lives literally downtown. I live 9 stations away from there. I got to the station at 11 p.m. I'm a male, 28 years old, and don't usually worry about walking at night and stuff like that. The walk home from the station is about 25 minutes up a main road. Then I turn off into my road and walk a bit further. As I'm walking down the main road, I notice someone who is walking behind me a bit further away from me. I thought nothing of it. He was just the only one around since it was late on a weekday. I kept track of him, and he bolted towards me, then stopped and did some strange mannerisms, like with his hands. I can't describe it. Then he stopped again, just standing there. I was so scared and started to walk faster to get home. As I got to the point of me having to walk in my street, I was thinking, for the love of Christ, please still don't be following me. But my heart sank to the floor when I also saw him turn the corner. I bolted as fast as I could, but he caught up to me. I was frozen in fear. He was wearing camo pants and a black hoodie covering his whole face. He was honestly the creepiest man I've ever seen when he took off his black mask that he was wearing. He never hurt me, but he said, "I've been watching you for a while. You shouldn't walk around at night. Next time, I won't be so forgiving." He did this with a strange facial expression, jumped up and down, and then bolted away. I made it home, and I was so scared that I called my dad, and he told me to never walk home at night again, especially that late at night. I told him that I always do it, and he just replied with, "I should know better." I'm happy he didn't find the house I live in, because when he caught up to me, I was about halfway there. I'm not going to walk home at night ever again. I used to be employed as a child protective worker. A report came through. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had visible physical injuries and told me exactly what happened. I'll spare the details, but it's horrific. As a child was in his sole care, we knew they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of workers out to the child's school while myself and my colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview, and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid. I'll do whatever I want, and you can't stop me." When I served him with the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside the building right now, I would fucking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing the emergency alarm, and even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The next day, we were in court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that happened the previous day. My colleagues who attended told me that the man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where's that bitch of a worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have removed a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a little resilience working in the field, and overall I mainly felt relieved that these children were placed with their aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had stayed back late in the office on an unrelated job. It was 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought I saw a shadow moving in front of my car, just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second, looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing rustling noises, and whether imagined or not, all the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come pick me up, explaining what just happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself that I was just being silly, and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around with his headlights shining in the car, and I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible for it, but I had not seen him, so I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She organized for security guards to escort us out to our car and said very clearly that no one was to stay in this building after hours alone. Then about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into our office goes through the reception staff. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I'm convinced that it's the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming in, each one getting longer. They addressed me as bitch or homewrecker, saying that I kidnapped and abused children. It was horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatening to rape, torture, kill, and find out where I live and burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say that it was the man, although they had questioned him. To me, it seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I had never had anything happen like this before. They did say that they were taking every letter very seriously and tracking down where they were posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took these threats seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day on the way home from work, I noticed a car was following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets, doubling back on the same route in the way that made absolutely no sense. Even after all that, the dark green Camry was still placed a little way behind me. I freaked out, but I already planned in my head what I would do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, pulled right in front of the building, and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove past and disappeared down a nearby street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, scared to get out of my car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic, I had forgotten to take down the license plate number. This upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the last straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from my colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office were restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small work groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed to go back into the office, there weren't any signs of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they're happy and safe with their family. This happened over 10 years ago, so excuse me if some of the details are a little fuzzy. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to a sleepover. We had plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We got out of my friend's apartment, have some fun, and around midnight we decided it's time for us to head back. But when we asked to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said that they were either too drunk or too high, so we eventually decided to just start walking back and would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way that we were walking all the way back. The apartment that we were partying at was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even get halfway there before a car starts slowly rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time and very naive to the ways of the world back then, so I wasn't too concerned. But Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking faster, so we start walking faster. The car picks up their pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk faster. We start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us, and 2 of the passenger doors opened, and 2 men got out. Realizing that there is no walking faster to get out of this situation, she instructs me, "Run now." So she takes off running, and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind the pickup truck. For a minute, we prayed that we weren't spotted. This is where details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, as there's only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear footsteps quickly approaching. Claire quietly indicates that we're going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of the gods, he gives up and decides to go back to the car with his friends. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably more around 15 to 20 seconds. We find a pool house area and spot a place to hide. We are hidden behind some fences and bushes, and we're anxiously waiting to see if they discover us. Their car pulls up to the pool house, and we're biting our nails, hoping that they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away, and we realize that we haven't been spotted. We were safe for now. But the cars circle around the apartment complex for hours and hours. They weren't giving up on looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but we needed to find a way out of there. It was in the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys that we were hanging out with. So short shorts and revealing tops. We were freezing. We found a disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled under while making phone calls to some of our friends to pick us up. We tried contacting the guy from the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls either. We felt completely alone and hopeless. Around 5 a.m., someone finally answered and said that they would pick us up. The best news I have ever heard in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex, but can't find the pool house. The group of men are still constantly circling around, but there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is with a little detective work, figuring out the building that they're facing was in front of them and are there dumpsters nearby, etc. We figure out where they are and make a run for it. We spot their car and hop in as fast as we can. Go, 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 we tell them, and our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We pass the group of men on our way out, and that's the last we saw of them. We make it back around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak in without my parents ever knowing that we had left. If Claire hadn't been with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted, raped, or possibly killed. So thankful for Claire and her friend that picked us up, but a big fuck you to the adult men who we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially fuck you to the guys who attempted to harm us. On a happier note, I am now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed that dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after the encounter. I live in a city in the Midwest and was hanging out at my friend's house one night. As I was leaving, it was dark, probably 10 or 11 at night. I'm a small woman and look a lot younger than I am, and so I have experienced quite a few creepy encounters, sadly. This one still makes me nervous. I walk to my vehicle, which is parked on the right end of the sidewalk, and get in. I live about 4 minutes away, so I'm kind of on autopilot. I never noticed anything until the SUV behind me seems like they are making the same turns. Sometimes I get paranoid that people are following me though, and continue to drive. I assume they'll turn at any moment, as they often do. Except when I pull into my driveway, they pull across the end. They block me in. I'm terrified at this point, so I call my husband inside and stay in my car. He walks to the door and they pull away. I still wonder why they followed me home and what would have happened if I was alone. I just got off work. Today I worked 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Around 10:45, a man walks in. I've previously had odd encounters with this man, such as seeing him walk behind me around my neighborhood and him hang out near my street. I had brushed those off since I live right next to where I worked and figured he probably lived there, but always kept an eye on him. Anyway, this man comes in and orders his usual pastry. I work in a bakery, and tells me I'm gonna stay inside and eat my pastry. For anyone who doesn't know, my country is currently under lockdown because of coronavirus, and all dining indoors is strictly prohibited. Not to mention my bakery is tiny, and there has never been any tables to sit inside, only a coffee bar that has never had space to sit in. I tell him, we're on lockdown, you can't really eat inside. His response chills me. Are you alone here? Yes, I responded stupidly, but quickly tried to catch myself, but my coworker will be here soon. A complete lie. It's about 11 a.m. and my coworker isn't scheduled until about 1 p.m. when I'm off. Then no one will see me in here, he responds, and goes back to eating his pastry at the coffee counter. I roll my eyes and go back to work, not getting paid enough to care if he quickly eats his pastry and leaves. 10 minutes pass, then 15. This guy is still in my bakery. I look over and he's finished his pastry and is moving closer to the open space in the counter meant for employees to walk back and forth between the front of the store and the employees only side. Now I start to get uncomfortable. I quickly text my coworker, a 30-year-old man who owns a lot of guns and treats me like a little sister. I look over and another man's even closer and is now reading a book and is peeking at me from above it. watching me. Multiple customers come in and out during his stay. Every time I turn my back to him, he gets closer and closer, until eventually he's halfway into our employees only area. I begin frantically texting my coworker, and he tells me that he's 4 minutes away. I finally make the decision to text my boyfriend. I avoided doing this so to keep from scaring him, but now I was terrified. I sat in the back of the employees area watching this guy. I held a knife just in case he decided to come any closer. Just as he takes a step closer, my coworker bursts through the door. A confrontation ensues, and the man leaves the shop but continues to sit in his parked car right in front and stares at me. I tell my coworker about the previous experiences I've had with him, and he's had enough. He marches out to the guy's car and tells the man the next time he comes around, it will be his last. My boyfriend pulls up at this point and joins in with a warning. So Matthew, aka my stalker, let's not meet again. I'm really writing this out as a way to vent because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure there's anything that can be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything. I'm going to start from the beginning. This is a story 2 years in the making, and I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with a master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD. Thinking we would make an investment, my dad and I purchased a house. The intent was to rent it out once I completed my PhD. This house was only a block away from a dive bar, where my dad was able to make pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy in my new house, because the next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy you could ever meet. So we met the neighbor, and he just seemed nice enough. He suggested that we exchange numbers just in case I ever needed anything, and I thought it was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state. I was left to my own devices. Literally, the day that he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away and let me know that he left a gift for me on my front porch. In this text exchange, he started using the pet names like Sweetie and Cutie. I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cat in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names, and I took this opportunity to make sure he knew that I was not interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all a person ever needs is a friend, and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me texts frequently, everything from inviting me to fishing to telling me that he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply or tell him I was busy. I didn't want to be rude, but I also had no interest in any sort of a relationship with him, other than neighborly. One night, I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street, letting me know that if my neighbor knocked on my door, I shouldn't answer. She then told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender that he was hearing voices that were getting louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with a hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police and the police took the hatchet from him, but made no arrest. The manager from the bar picked me up and I spent the night at her house. She told me that the police said that the neighbor was on meth. After that, I tried to distance myself even more, but things got even weirder. One day I went outside to my car to find a dead squirrel in my driveway. The squirrel had very clearly been run over and moved right in front of my driver's side door. I stepped over it, got in my car, and left. When I returned, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I suspected that he was the one who put the squirrel in my driveway. Another time, I walked out of my house to see he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on a brick in his front yard. He came out and told me that this was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me inviting me over, and I would come up with excuses or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, which told me that he was watching me come and go from my house. Around Halloween, he handcrafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the son of a bitch who played mind games, November 2012. What the fuck? All this time, sending me texts. Eventually, I got fed up and stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I stopped responding, he threw a 50-pound flower pot at my front door. You know, those big concrete planters. Yeah, one of those. I called the police, who advised me to get a stalking, no contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video to my screen. I declined it twice. I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no contact order. I saw 3 different victims advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during this time, someone had attempted breaking into my home. I had an ADT security system, so while they didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of COVID. I was trapped in my home 24/7 with my stalker neighbor next door. Luckily, court proceedings for protection orders did not stop. Right before court, he sent me a text telling me that he was sorry for what he had done, that he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then went on to tell me that he could tell that my hair had got longer and that I looked beautiful. I went to court and provided all the evidence I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened. The text he sent me asking if I wanted a massage. The text I sent to him telling him that the way that he was speaking to me was inappropriate. The text saying that he knew he made me feel uncomfortable. I told the judge that I expected he attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. The kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said that he was in recovery and trying to turn over a new leaf. He said he didn't oppose the protection order at all. So, in March 2020, I actually received the stalking no contact order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he did do some weird shit, but that's because he's a weird guy. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety. That's until he got on drugs again. This time, we found an unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one that he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect it was a warning to him. After this, and for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. He moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We're still together and as happy in our relationship as we can be. New Year's 2021, I was awoken to yelling. I turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out of his window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities, 7 minutes can be a long time. He called me a harlot. He said, "Happy fucking New Year." He said that he was gonna blow up his house with the gas line. I called the police, who responded. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove that he was in violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." They left without speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway is pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn. I always made sure that the cameras were charged, all 5 of them. Yes, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard was covered. Since then, he has been seen by other neighbors, talking to people who aren't there, going outside and screaming nonsense. Things like, I have Cheerios on my necklace, or I'll put my penis in your butt. I'm not even joking. This basically brings me to last week. In the morning, I was getting ready for the day when I heard screaming, someone is gonna die over this sweatshirt. I turned on the cameras. I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house screaming, are you fucking proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everyone all fired up. I called the police once again. They didn't charge him with violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. The police told me that it seems like he's off his medication again. And that was that. They left. Last night, I was woken up by hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint, and they just told him to stop. And that was that. As I write this, he's outside continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. That fence was the one thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard, and now it's gone. All of this is to say, I'm fucking tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident that he's not trying to break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house and move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, so I don't make much money. Renting won't work because I have 4 cats, and finding a place to rent with so much animals can be difficult, if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's particularly my fault I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign another mortgage, and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then, I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. I'm tired. I'm angry. So I figured I'd write this to vent. I'm a 33-year-old female. I went to a convention with 2 female friends and stayed in the downtown area hotel near the convention center. Catty corner from our hotel was a chain drugstore. It was still light outside and we decided to get some snacks to eat while we were watching Netflix that night. While my friends were looking for candy, I stood back because I wanted some chips and noticed a man next to them. He wasn't looking at the candy. He was watching them. They hadn't noticed, so when they picked their candy, I whispered them to follow me. I picked up the pace, turned quickly down the middle, and down an aisle. I told them there's a creepy guy there, and to stay together. That's when I noticed he's on the other end of the aisle. We kept taking turns down the various aisles, and he's following us, but walking where he's between us and the exit. At this time, we're basically trapped in the back of the store near the pharmacy. The line for the pharmacy was long, but it was full of men, so we got in line and started talking to the men in front of us, hoping that would scare off our stalker. We could still see him in the big globe mirror, one aisle down waiting for us. We waited in that line for 30 minutes to ask for security. The security swept the pharmacy, and the stalker guy had left. We were extra thankful when the security guard offered to walk us back to the front of our hotel. I don't know what intentions that guy had for us, but I'm glad I'll never find out. This happened when I was about 12 or 13, and I went back to look at the books on the other side of the store by myself, while my parents were shopping. When I was there, I noticed this guy that was about 5 feet away from me. I didn't really pay much attention to him and just went to the other side of the shelf. But then he also went to the other side when I did. I was a little uncomfortable, but I thought it was just a coincidence. So I went back to the other side. Again, when I went to the other side, so did he. He started getting closer and closer to me, making me a little more freaked out. And he still followed me every time I would go to the other side. At this point, we're just circling the shelves, So when he was still walking to the other side, I went to the DVD section that was next to the shelf. I saw him look around, and then a woman, who I assumed was his wife, appeared next to him, and he whispered something to her, and they both started looking around. I was kind of shaking because I knew that they were looking for me. Fortunately, my parents came just in time, and when we were leaving I saw them again, glaring at me. This happened 2 days ago. I'm a 22-year-old female. I live in an apartment in a large downtown area right next to my university. So I was pulling into the parking lot of the CVS near my apartment, and I noticed a woman standing at one of the other cars near mine, talking to a man inside. When I got out, they started walking in, and the woman tried to flag me down and talk to me. I just ignored her and walked into the store. The man who was in the car got out and followed me in. He followed me through several aisles before stopping me to ask if I wanted to be on his Onlyfans and make porn videos for him. I told him that I wasn't interested multiple times, but he continues to ask me questions about myself, my name, where I work, live, and if I have an Onlyfans. He started to describe sexual acts he wanted to do with me for his OF. I was so scared in the moment and wasn't sure what else to do. But eventually, after I turned down his offer enough times, he walked away and left the store without buying anything. What was really weird is that he was wearing an obviously fake lab coat and said he was in town for a pharmacist convention. I don't know. When I got to the register to check out, I noticed an employee looking out the window, and one of them told the other to call the police if they saw that woman again. When I got to my car, the man was still sitting in his car right next to mine. Luckily, I don't think he was able to follow me out due to the busy area I was in. In retrospect, I think this guy might have been a human trafficker looking for easy targets. I just hope no one else was bothered by him and decided to go anywhere with him. Stay vigilant, ladies. Edit. I did make a report to my local police in case anyone else had an encounter with this guy. Also, I do carry mace. So this happened about a year ago, and I still don't return to the store without my husband. So last July, I took my then 4 and 6-year-old sons to Target to shop for back to school. Since having kids and hearing all these horror stories, I'm very observant of my surroundings when I'm out. Anyways, while in Target, like most women, I looked through all the sections. When in the women's clothing, I noticed 2 older men close by that kept looking over our way. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, so I kept going on with my business, but keeping my boys super close. We go to the baby section, then pop-ups, toys, makeup, and the same thing. I was really feeling uneasy because they seemed to be everywhere we were, and they never had a cart. One guy was holding one little thing. I go to check out and wait for a big group of nurses leaving Starbucks to walk out with. I threw my boys in the car without buckling them and locked the doors. As soon as I look up, the 2 guys walk out empty-handed, looking around. I didn't think they saw me, so I started to leave. When I looked in the rearview mirror and saw them behind me in a truck, I stopped right there, turned around, and took a photo of them, making sure that they could see me. They turn like they're going back to the store and park a couple stores down where they can no longer see me. And I call the cops. While on the phone with them, in a full-blown panic attack, I watch one of the guys change his shirt and go back inside. I waited until the police got there so I could make sure that they got and had the right guys. I don't know what their plan was for that day, but my mama gut told me that it wasn't anything good. I'm so thankful that my babies and I are okay. Okay, so I just want to start off by saying I'm posting this just because I want to vent about what happened yesterday, because I'm still freaked out. So this all started because my mom needed a few things from Walmart, and I was going there anyways. So I decided to save her the trouble and get them for her. I get what I need and check out. I walk outside and realize I parked on the other side of the store. So I started walking. I had this uneasy feeling, but I pushed it away by saying it was just my social anxiety kicking in. So I get to the row I'm parked in, and I'm closing in on my car when I notice these two guys walking behind me. I thought nothing of it because Walmart was packed when I went in. So I just ignored them until I realized that they weren't stopping. They were following me all the way back to my car. To put it in perspective, I parked on the way end, away from everyone else, so I wouldn't get my car door smacked in. They stopped a few feet from my spot beside me and watched me get in my car. They had to be about late 20s, early 30s. They stood there for a minute, but walked away when they saw me pull my phone out. I called my dad, shaking and explaining everything to him. He stayed on the phone with me until I calmed down enough to drive home. You might be saying, well, that's not that bad, but it gets worse. I'm still on the phone with my dad, trying to calm down when I noticed they came back, but this time they're in their car. They slowly drove by my car, and the one in the passenger seat looks at me with a creepy smile and waves at me in a flirty way, and then they drove away. Let's just say I didn't leave that parking lot for a long time. Side note, I was so shaken up, I forgot to pay attention to the road and almost crashed into a car that was speeding in the parking lot. Also, I know the men knew I was only 16 to 18 years old because I have a school parking lot pass on my rearview mirror. I was about 12. Me and my mom had gone to town 45 minutes out to do some shopping with some of her friends. I had a corn snake at the time, so I asked her if I could walk around the pet store, one door down from the mini supermarket she was shopping in, to compare prices of frozen mice with our local seller. She said sure, just to be back as soon as I was done. The pet store had been there as long as I can remember. It had a very warehouse feel about it, and was poorly lit by dim fluorescent lights too far above the ground. Before checking out the mice, I just wanted to check around the rest of the store, being the curious 12-year-old I was. As I was roaming the aisles, I noticed him. He was in every aisle I strolled down. Bald, middle age, a bit tubby, wearing dark plumber overalls over a white shirt. It was summer and it was hot. I remember thinking, why on earth would you come into a non-air conditioning building like that? He carried a basket, but there's nothing in it. He slowly stalked me down the aisles. I noticed his basket wasn't getting any fuller. I started walking faster, taking random turns down different aisles to see if I was just being paranoid, but he was always 10 to 15 feet behind me. At some point, I finally thought I lost him. I power walked out of the pet store, and as soon as I cleared the doors, I sprinted down the street to the mini supermarket that my mom was in. She hadn't even made it down the second aisle completely. I caught up to her, immediately stripped off my bright pink hoodie and slung it in the cart, as well as ripped out the hair ties in my hair. I was smart for doing that because when I looked back at the door, he was standing there, still carrying the basket from the pet store and scanning the store for any sight of a 12-year-old girl in a bright pink hoodie and ponytail. When we left, I saw you in your van as you drove away, a plain white van, like something out of a true crime documentary or horror film. I think about him sometimes, and how if you would have caught me before I got to the supermarket on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, what horrors could have been waiting for me in the back of his van. Guy in overalls who followed me out of the pet store without putting down his basket. Even after 10 years, let's not ever meet again. This happened almost 10 years ago when I was 18. I wanted to go pick up some groceries at our local Walmart. It was around 11 at night and I just got off work. I usually have no problem going anywhere by myself, But on this night, my inner self was telling me to invite a friend to tag along. I am roughly 5 feet tall, female, 105 pounds, but I don't get spooked too easily and always carry pepper spray with me. Anyways, back to the story. I call my friend and ask if she'll accompany me, and I go to pick her up. We walk into the produce side of Walmart, and almost right away I notice this man staring at us very intently. He was around 5'5", kinda heavy, had a Hawaiian shirt on, and looked of Hawaiian descent. So we're over by the fresh produce, and I'm keeping an eye on him as he pretends to be looking at bread, but clearly keeps putting things back. I turn my back for a second to grab something. Then I hear a man's voice ask, "Hey, do you guys know of anywhere I can get food this late?" For more background information, I live in a city of about 50,000 people. Right across from this Walmart was Applebee's, which stays open rather late, a McDonald's a quarter mile up the road, and other various places to get food. Plus, we're in the middle of Walmart, duh. So I don't beat around the bush and flatly tell him that there's a couple restaurants around where we were. He then asked, "Well, what's fun to do around here?" It's late at night, so nothing really to do except maybe go to Applebee's or a local bar. I tell him Applebee's is open and we have bars downtown, but that's all I'm aware of. He proceeds to ask what we were doing when we leave, and I tell him we have to leave now. He apologizes and said he didn't mean to be creepy. We walk away and are looking in the frozen aisle when I spot him on the opposite side walking by. I tell my friend I've had a bad feeling about him since we walked in and wanted to test out if he was following us. We walked a few aisles and sure enough, he was on the other end nonchalantly walking by, pretending not to see us. I backtrack a couple aisles to get something and he walks up, pretending to look at things. I finally ask him if I can help him with something. I think this threw him off guard by being so direct because he stutters and asks what aisle the milk is on or something. I tell him and we leave to check out. Well, wouldn't you know it, he's in the checkout right next to us with a pack of gum, no milk or whatever else he was looking at. He finishes first and watches us leave the store. Me thinking he's gone by now, tells my friend, let's just run to the car. So we run out to the car, look around to make sure we didn't see him. Now, here's the real creepy part. As I'm leaving the parking lot, we see him sitting on the trunk of his car, watching people leave Walmart. I drove by to get his license plate number. He sees us and rushes into his car. I sped off as quickly as I could, so he can't see where I went. I then called the cops and tell them about what just happened, and relayed the license plate number to them. So creepy Hawaiian shirt guy, who was supposedly looking for places to eat while in the middle of Walmart, please let's never meet again. I was in Walmart earlier this evening with my 2 daughters, one elementary school aged and the other middle school. We looked around for school supplies for a minute and then rounded the corner to see the Halloween candy on display. As we turned the corner, a slightly older guy came really close to us, like he was in a hurry and almost hit our cart. He didn't have a cart or any items. I said, "Oh, excuse me," and then stopped in front of the candy to let my youngest ask a bunch of questions about the candy pumpkins. The man stopped quickly and started rummaging around the candies right next to my daughter. He was listening to our conversation and reacted strangely when my daughter said that she wanted to take a picture of the candy. He was twitchy and caught my eye and looked away quickly. We moved on to the women's PJ section to look around for a few minutes, and I noticed the same man pass by really close again. He was turning to the right towards the shoes with a big bag of candy cradled in his arms. My girls went across the aisle to the boys' clothing section while I finished deciding, and when I was catching up to them a couple minutes later, the guy was wandering through the boys' clothes towards my daughter. He paused and looked confused, but still like he was in a rush, and watched me discuss sizes with my youngest. This is when I started thinking something was off with this dude. I mentioned him to my older daughter, and then we moved through the partition into the girls' clothes. I didn't see him again for a few minutes, and figured it was nothing. But then he came into the section and was acting like he was trying to pick out a Justice shirt. He still had the big bag of candy that he kept adjusting his grip on. I kept seeing him take quick peeks at my girls, but every time he saw me watching him, he pretended to be occupied in his shopping. I told my oldest I thought he was following us, and she said that she noticed the same thing. I made my youngest get in the cart so I could keep them both close. They both tend to wander a bit. The guy then walked out of the girls section, passing close behind me, but he looped around the partition back into the boys section and stopped at the opening on the other side, but still straight in the line of sight. He caught my eye again and twitched, then pulled out his phone, texted something, and walked away. By this time, I was on high alert and possibly quite paranoid. I looked around and saw two slightly older men standing around. One was in electronics, kind of looking at a half-empty display of something. But I swear he glanced at me several times, even though there were 3 or 4 racks of clothes and a hallway with occasional people in between. The third guy had wandered into the girls section and was apparently considering buying a Justice shirt too. Every time he saw me notice him watching us, he would wander down to the baby aisles, but keep coming back after a couple minutes. I realize now, looking back, that if I suspected something bad, I should have just gotten my girls out of there. Clothes shopping for a picky preteen isn't fun, and I wanted to get it done and over with. On top of that, I kept second guessing myself that the other 2 guys were just a coincidence. I kept my girls really close to me after we moved to the women's section, and I didn't see any of them again, and I stopped feeling creeped out, like we were being watched. Now, it's the middle of the night, and I'm pretty freaked out wondering what could have happened if I didn't notice the first guy, and continue to let my girls wander around. Should I report anything? I can't really imagine anything would be done just because I noticed some guy watching my daughters in Walmart. So a couple days ago, I was headed into the grocery store and waited for a car to pass so I could cross. Well, he was driving very slowly. I saw he had a digital camera in his hand, and he snapped a picture of me. The flash went off. The windows were down and everything, like he's fully prepared to do this, and he's probably done it many times before. I very audibly said, "What the fuck?" And by the time I realized what had just happened, he had driven away. It sufficiently freaked me out to the point where I asked all my female friends if they've ever experienced anything like that before. Of course, all of them had a different but equally creepy encounter with a man, because why wouldn't they? I feel like a lot of women are constantly put into uncomfortable situations because a lot of men just can't act like women are actual human beings. I'll be staying away from that store for a while. Maybe not creepy, I don't know. I'm a 23-year-old female. A few years ago when I was 18, I was going grocery shopping. As I was walking down the aisles, I noticed this older guy, maybe in his late 50s, early 60s, who seemed to be following me. Every aisle I went down, he was at the other end staring at me. I'm a bit paranoid because I'm 5'3" and 95 pounds, and know that I would have a hard time fighting someone off if I needed to. I kept my eye on him, and when I went to check out, he was right behind me. I stupidly at the time didn't ask someone to walk me out to my car because I carry tons of self-defense stuff like pepper spray, screamers, window breakers, and seatbelt cutters. I was meek and didn't want to bother the busy workers. I booked it to my car and saw him following me. I locked my doors and sped out of the parking lot. I'm thankful I checked my back mirrors because he was still following me. At this point, I kept circling the same block over and over. After like 5 minutes of doing this, he finally got the point that I was onto him and would keep circling the blocks until he stopped. He drove away. I circled a few more times and then just drove to my friend's house because I was scared that he was still out there and would find out where I lived. What's also scary is a similar thing happened the next time I was shopping. It wasn't the same guy, but it was still just unnerving. I told my mom and she gave me the rules of having someone walk me to my car, and if someone's following me, to pull into a police station. I usually don't bother to post anything on Reddit, but I figured typing out this situation might make me feel better. So I am 23 years old, female, and live on my own. I just moved out to this area for school and went to my local Walmart to gather supplies for cleaning. As I walked in, I take note of an older man near the entrance that I briefly made eye contact with and nodded at, and just kept walking. I was looking at folders for a bit and then made my way back towards the electronics section at the back of the store to look for a charger. I was making my way through the aisles on the way down, looking at the fall decorations. Lots of them were geared towards kids, so I just glanced at them quickly and turned around to leave. The same man was there and was holding and inspecting some paper plates with childish Halloween designs on them for kids. I didn't even hear him walk into the aisle. I thought that was a little strange but brushed it off, thinking he had grandkids. I left and made my way into the electronics section where they kept the chargers behind locked glass doors. I'm there for about 7 minutes and the same man shows up, and I see the reflection of him in the glass that he's checking out my ass as he walks by. At this point, I was pretty far away from where I last saw him. I brushed it off because I'm used to men making quick glances like that in public, and left it at that. He was looking at the display behind me at the other side, goes and leaves, and then this is where it gets creepy. He stands right behind me and starts aggressively eyeing me up and down while licking his lips, paying particular attention to my backside and my legs. He's basically undressing me with his eyes. At that point, he was giving off massive creep vibes, and I started shaking with adrenaline. I was alone in the aisle with him. I was afraid that he would try to grab me. I stayed calm, despite my throat feeling like it had a ball in it, and waited for him to leave. He does. Then I go down a random aisle near the electronics, but in the general part of the store, and waited there for a few minutes standing there to see if he would show up. I noticed that there were 2 men behind the electronics counter and wanted to stay near them if anything went wrong. I wanted to confirm if he was following me or not. Sure enough, 5 minutes later there he was. I caught him quite literally speed walking down the main walkway, looking down each aisle as if frantically looking for me. He stops dead, saw me notice him, and then promptly scurried off. I went back into the electronics section and informed them that I was being followed and was not comfortable and asked if there was security. They didn't have any, just theft prevention, and offered to check me out there or accompany me to finish shopping. They were very kind, and I took them up on their offer to get my cleaning supplies nearby. As we turned together, the same guy was standing further away staring. He literally just increased the radius he was using to follow me and watching me from the front of the registers now. I get my stuff, check out, and then weave all through the clothing section to leave at a different section than the one I originally entered from and originally saw him. I didn't see him the whole time I did this. Got to my car. I promptly drove to my new place, but stopped halfway in a random neighborhood. I pulled over and pretended that it was my house to see if anyone was following me. I did not want this guy finding out where I lived. I drove home when I didn't see anyone. I may be overreacting, but this is a new area to me, and I've never had someone be quite that creepy and persistent in following me. I've done things on my own plenty of times and never had an issue. This all happened in the middle of the day at like 3 p.m. I was wearing loose clothes and just wanted to make a quick trip in and out. I have no idea what could have happened if I didn't notice or what his intentions might have been. I can't imagine that they were good. Maybe he would have followed me to my new place. Who knows? Either way, this whole encounter was scary. He had no clue I saw his reflection and the nasty expression on his face. Just stay aware, guys, and watch yourself. Two years ago, I lived near a big city while taking care of my great-grandma. One day, me and my mom decided to get some groceries, but we did not have a car, so we had to walk. We were almost there when I heard my first name being shouted. I ignored it at first, thinking I was hearing things. But then this random lady that looked pretty disheveled and scared ran up to me, grabbing my arm, and kept repeating my name. My name is not a common name, and everyone I know calls me by a completely unrelated name, so there's no way that she overheard someone else saying it. She looked so frightened, and I'll never be able to get her face out of my mind. She was holding onto my arms with a really tight grip, and I remember being surprised because she was very skinny and frail looking. Her grip left bruises on my arms for a while. My mom ended up grabbing my arm and dragging me away. She was freaked out too, but didn't say anything. She just kept praying. When I got home, she prayed a lot and blessed me. I was not scared of the lady, just more confused. How did she know my name? Why did she look so scared?